In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a shocking theft uncovers a centuries-old secret buried in the Ashford estate, a hidden fortune in gold, forged documents, and a web of betrayal that threatens to unravel the town's peace. When Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster with a razor-sharp mind, stumbles upon a cryptic map, she's drawn into a dangerous game of greed and deception. From stolen lockets to secret vaults, each clue reveals a deeper conspiracy, with shadowy figures manipulating the village from afar. Will Marple untangle the lies before the final truth destroys St. Mary Mead forever? Chapter 1. The shadow in St. Mary Mead. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, a village so quaint it seemed to exist outside of time. Miss Jane Marple sat in her favourite armchair by the window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she observed the world beyond her lace curtains. The village was waking. With the milkman's cart rattling down the lane and Mrs. Price from the post office bustling toward her shop. To an outsider, it was a picture of serene normalcy. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the subtle discord in the air, tension that had been building for weeks. She set her knitting aside, her fingers pausing as her mind sifted through the fragments of gossip and observation she'd collected. The vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, had mentioned a stranger lingering near the churchyard last Sunday, his face half hidden by a scarf despite the mild weather. Then there was the matter of young Tommy Pierce, who'd been seen arguing with someone in the woods, a heated exchange, according to Dolly Bantry, who'd overheard it while walking her spaniel. And just yesterday, Miss Hartnell had whispered about a missing silver candlestick from her parlour, a theft she dared not report for fear of scandal. These were threads, Miss Marple thought, and she was adept at weaving them into a tapestry that revealed truths others missed. The clock on the mantel struck 10, and Miss Marple rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. She had promised to meet Colonel Bantry at the vicarage for a discussion about the church fete, but her true purpose was to observe the villagers gathered there. Something was amiss in St. Mary Mead, and she intended to uncover it before it unravelled further. As she stepped into the crisp morning air, her black patterned shoes clicking on the path, a figure emerged from the mist near the hedge. He was tall, lean, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that darted nervously. His coat was too large for his frame, and his hands were shoved deep into his pockets. Miss Marple's heart gave a small flutter, not of fear, but of recognition. She didn't know him, yet his presence felt like a piece of the puzzle she'd been turning over in her mind. "Good morning," she said, her voice gentle but firm, as if addressing a skittish cat. "You're new to St. Mary Mead, aren't you?" The man froze, his gaze flickering to her before settling on the ground. "Just passing through," he muttered, his accent carrying a hint of London's rougher edges. "Didn't mean to bother." "Anyone? No bother at all," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "But it's a small village, and we notice newcomers. Have you a place to stay?" He hesitated, then nodded curtly, "with Mrs. Copling at the boarding house." Mrs. Copling's boarding house was a modest establishment on the edge of the village, known for housing travellers who preferred to keep to themselves. Miss Marple filed this away, along with the man's unease. "Well, I hope you enjoy your stay," she said, tipping her head. "Perhaps we'll see you at the church fete." He mumbled something incoherent and hurried off, his footsteps fading into the mist. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind already spinning. A stranger in St. Mary Mead was not unusual, but one so guarded, so out of place, was a rarity. She made a mental note to visit Mrs. Copling later. The vicarage was a short walk, its stone walls glowing warmly in the sunlight that had begun to burn through the mist. Inside, the drawing-room was abuzz with the usual suspects: Colonel Bantry, red-faced and jovial, discussing cricket with the vicar; Mrs. Clement, fussing over a tray of scones; and Miss Weatherby, whose sharp tongue was already dissecting the shortcomings of the Fates flower arrangements. Miss Marple slipped into the room, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow, and took a seat near the window. "Jane, my dear," Colonel Bantry boomed, spotting her, "you're just in time to settle a dispute. Should we have a tombola or a raffle for the main prize?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes scanning the room. "A raffle, I think. It's simpler, and people do love the anticipation." Her gaze lingered on the vicar, who seemed distracted, his fingers tapping nervously on his teacup. Something was troubling him, and Miss Marple suspected it went beyond the logistics of the fete. As the meeting progressed, she listened more than she spoke, her mind cataloguing every gesture, every inflection. Mrs. Clement mentioned the stranger, again describing him as oddly intense, and Miss Weatherby chimed in with a rumour that he'd been seen near the manor house at dusk. The manor, owned by the reclusive Sir Henry Clithering, had been empty for months, its owner away in London. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. An empty manor, a missing candlestick, a secretive stranger. The threads were beginning to form a pattern. After the meeting, she lingered, offering to help Mrs. Clement tidy up. As they stacked teacups, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward the stranger. "This new gentleman at Mrs. Copling's," she said casually, "he seems to have caught everyone's attention." Mrs. Clement's hands paused. "Oh yes. Calls himself Mr. Finch. Keeps to himself, mostly, but I saw him talking to Tommy Pierce yesterday. They seemed, well, not friendly, exactly. More like they were arguing." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Arguing? About what, do you think?" "I couldn't hear," Mrs. Clement admitted, but Tommy looked upset. Ran off toward the woods afterward. The woods again. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind racing. Tommy Pierce was a troubled lad, prone to mischief, but he was no fool. If he was arguing with this Mr. Finch, there was a reason, and if Finch was lurking near the manor, that reason might be connected to something more sinister than village gossip by afternoon. The sun had banished the mist, and St. Mary Mead sparkled under a clear sky. Miss Marple decided to visit Mrs. Copling's boarding house, armed with a basket of homemade preserves as an excuse. Mrs. Copling, a stout woman with a penchant for gossip, welcomed her warmly. "Jane Marple, what a treat!" she exclaimed, ushering her into the cramped parlour. "What brings you here?" "Just thought you might enjoy some of my blackberry jam," Miss Marple said, setting the basket down. "And I heard you have a new lodger. Mr. Finch, is it?" Mrs. Copling's eyes gleamed. "Oh yes. Quiet sort, keeps odd hours. Comes in late, leaves early. Says he's a writer, working on a book, but I've not seen him with so much as a notebook." "A writer," Miss Marple repeated, her tone neutral. "How interesting. Does he receive many visitors?" "Not a one," Mrs. Copling said, leaning closer. "But he gets letters, lots of them. Plain envelopes, no return address, I reckon. He's up to something." Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions deepening. A writer who didn't write, a stranger who argued with village boys, and letters with no sender. This Mr. Finch was no ordinary visitor. She thanked Mrs. Copling and left, her steps purposeful as she headed toward the woods. The woods were dense, their paths winding through ancient oaks and tangled underbrush. Miss Marple moved carefully, her eyes scanning for signs of Tommy or Finch. She found neither, but she did find something else. A scrap of cloth caught on a bramble, dark blue and slightly frayed. It matched the coat Finch had been wearing that morning. Nearby, the ground was disturbed, as if someone had been digging. Miss Marple knelt, her fingers brushing the soil. It was loose, recently turned, but whatever had been buried or unearthed was gone. Her heart quickened. This was no coincidence. She stood, brushing dirt from her gloves, and made her way back to the village. She needed to speak to Tommy Pierce, and quickly. Tommy was at the village shop, loitering near the counter with a sullen expression. Miss Marple approached him with her usual warmth, offering a peppermint from her handbag. "Tommy, dear, I heard you had a bit of a row yesterday. Everything all right?" He scowled, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Ain't none of your business, miss." "Perhaps not," she said gently, "but I worry about you." "Was it that Mr. Finch you were speaking with?" Tommy's eyes widened, then narrowed. "What if it was? He's just some bloke. Told me to keep out of the woods, that's all." "Did he say why?" Miss Marple pressed, her voice soft but insistent. Tommy shrugged, but his unease was palpable. "Said it's dangerous. Said I'd get hurt if I kept poking around." Miss Marple's mind raced. Dangerous indeed. She thanked Tommy and left, her thoughts turning to Sir Henry's manner. If Finch was warning people away from the woods, and if he was connected to the manor, there was a chance something was hidden. There's something worth arguing over, worth stealing for. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting untouched. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still incomplete. She needed more information, and she knew just the person to help. Sir Henry Clithering himself. He was due back in St. Mary Mead tomorrow, and she intended to be at the manor when he arrived. The next morning, she dressed carefully, choosing a hat that was both elegant and unobtrusive. The manor was a grand old house, its windows dark and its gardens overgrown. Sir Henry's car pulled up just as she arrived, and he greeted her with a warm smile. "Miss Marple, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, stepping out. "I have a feeling you might know more about our village's recent visitor than you realize," she said, her eyes twinkling. "May we talk inside?" Sir Henry raised an eyebrow but led her into the drawing room. As they sat, Miss Marple recounted her observations. Finch's secretive behaviour, the argument with Tommy, the disturbed earth in the woods, and the missing candlestick. Sir Henry listened, his expression growing serious. "Jane," he said at last, "you've stumbled onto something I'd hoped to keep quiet. I've been working with Scotland Yard on a series of thefts across the county. Valuable artefacts, stolen from country houses. We suspected the thief was using St. Mary Mead as a base, hiding the goods before moving them." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And you think this Mr. Finch is involved?" "It's possible," Sir Henry admitted. "We've had reports of a man matching his description near several of the thefts, but we've no proof yet." "Then we must find it," Miss Marple said firmly. "I suggest we start with the woods. I believe something is buried there, and Mr. Finch knows what it is." Sir Henry agreed, and they made a plan. That night, under the cover of darkness, they would search the woods, accompanied by a trusted constable. Miss Marple felt a thrill of anticipation. She was no stranger to danger, but the stakes felt higher this time. If Finch was a thief or were she would need all her wits to catch him. The woods were silent as they approached, the moon casting eerie shadows. The constable, a young man named Harris, carried a lantern. its light flickering over the trees. Miss Marple led them to the spot she'd found earlier, the disturbed earth now more obvious in the lantern's glow. Harris began to dig, his shovel biting into the soil. After a few minutes, he struck something solider wooden box, small but heavy. Sir Henry opened it, revealing a collection of silver and gold trinkets, including Miss Hartnell's candlestick. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The stolen goods." Before Miss Marple could respond, a rustle came from the trees. Finch emerged, his face pale in the moonlight, a revolver glinting in his hand. "Step away from the box," he snarled. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Finch, there's no need for that. You're caught. Put the gun down." He laughed, a harsh sound. "Caught by an old lady and a retired copper? I don't think so." But Miss Marple had anticipated this. She'd noticed Harris quietly, circling behind Finch, his movements silent. In a flash, the constable tackled him, the revolver skidding into the underbrush. Finch struggled, but Harris was stronger, pinning him to the ground. As they bound Finch's hands, Miss Marple examined the box. "These aren't just trinkets," she said, holding up a gold locket. "This belonged to Lady Ashford, stolen. Last month. You've been busy, Mr. Finch." Finch glared, but said nothing. Sir Henry shook his head. "Jane, you're remarkable. How did you know?" "I didn't," she admitted, her smile modest. "But I've learned to trust the little things, the odd glance, the misplaced word. They always lead somewhere." By dawn, Finch was in custody, and the stolen goods were on their way to Scotland Yard. St. Mary Mead buzzed with the news, and Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her knitting waiting. She picked up her needles, the rhythm soothing, and let her mind wander to the next mystery. For in St. Mary Mead there was always another thread to unravel. Chapter 2. The Whisper of Secrets. The morning after Mr. Finch's arrest, St. Mary Mead was alive with whispers. The village, usually content with the gentle hum of daily life, buzzed with the kind of excitement that only a scandal could ignite. Miss Jane Marple, however, sat quietly in her garden, pruning her roses with a pair of well-worn scissors. The sun was high, casting dappled shadows through the trellis, and the air carried the faint scent of honeysuckle. To an outsider, she might have seemed engrossed in her gardening, but her mind was far from the roses. It was piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that, despite Finch's capture, felt incomplete. The wooden box of stolen treasures had been a significant find, but Miss Marple's instincts told her there was more to the story. Finch had been too confident, too quick to pull a revolver, for a mere thief caught in the act. His eyes had held not just fear, but a kind of desperate calculation, as if he were protecting something or someone beyond the trinkets in the box. And then there was Tommy Pierce, whose sullen silence yesterday hinted at knowledge he wasn't sharing. Miss Marple snipped a wilted bloom, her thoughts turning to the boy. He was the key, she was certain, to whatever lay beneath the surface. Of this affair, she set down her secateurs and brushed her hands on her apron. The village clock chimed 11, a reminder of her appointment with Dolly Bantry at Gossington Hall. Dolly had insisted on a morning tea to discuss the dreadful business of the thefts, and Miss Marple suspected her friend's penchant for drama would yield useful tidbits. She donned her hat, a sensible straw fare with a single ribbon, and set off down the lane, her walking stick tapping lightly on the path. Gossington Hall was a sprawling estate, its red brick facade softened by ivy and surrounded by manicured lawns. Dolly Bantry greeted her at the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Jane, you're a marvel," she exclaimed, ushering her into the drawing room, catching that dreadful man in the woods. "Arthur's still talking about it, and you know how he hates to admit you've outdone him." Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chintz-covered chair. "It was hardly just me, Dolly. Sir Henry and Constable Harris did the heavy lifting. I merely noticed a few things." "Pish!" Dolly waved a hand, pouring tea from a silver pot. "You noticed what no one else did. Now, tell me, do you think that's the end of it? Or is there more to this Finch fellow?" Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. "I suspect there's more. Mr. Finch didn't strike me as a lone operator. He was too purposeful. And there's the matter of Tommy Pierce." Dolly's eyebrows shot up. "Tommy, that scamp. What's he got to do with it?" "I'm not sure yet," Miss Marple admitted, "but he was arguing with Finch, and he's been unusually secretive. I think he knows something, perhaps something he's afraid to tell." Dolly leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You don't think he's mixed up in the thefts, do you? He's a naughty boy, but I can't imagine him a criminal." "Nor I," Miss Marple said. "But boys like Tommy often stumble into things they don't fully understand. I'd like to speak with him again, but discreetly." As they chatted, Colonel Bantry strode in, his moustache bristling. "Jane, you've stirred up quite a hornet's nest. Sir Henry's been on the telephone with Scotland Yard all morning. They're sending an inspector to tie up loose ends. Fellow named Slack, I believe." Miss Marple's lips twitched. Inspector Slack was a man of energy but little imagination, prone to charging at problems like a bull at a gate. She'd dealt with him before, and while he was competent, he often missed the subtleties she found so revealing. "I look forward to meeting him," she said politely, though her mind was already planning how to steer the investigation without ruffling Slack's feathers after tea. Miss Marple excused herself and headed toward the village school, where Tommy Pierce spent his mornings when he wasn't playing truant. The schoolhouse was a low, stone building, its playground alive with children's laughter. Miss Marple waited by the gate, her presence unremarkable to the children, but noted by the schoolmistress, Miss Brewster, who approached with a wary smile. "Miss Marple, what brings you here?" Miss Brewster asked, her tone polite but guarded. "I was hoping to have a word with Tommy Pierce," Miss Marple said. "Nothing serious, just a small matter I thought he might help with." Miss Brewster's expression softened. "He's been a bit off lately, quiet, which isn't like him. He's in the classroom now, finishing some work." "Shall I fetch him?" "Please," Miss Marple said, and a few minutes later, Tommy slouched out, his cap pulled low over his eyes. He looked at her with a mix of defiance and unease. "What do you want, miss?" he asked, kicking at a pebble. Miss Marple smiled, offering another peppermint. "Just a chat, Tommy. I heard you had words with Mr. Finch the other day. I'm curious what he said to upset you so." Tommy's jaw tightened, but he took the sweet, "Told you already. He said to stay out of the woods. Said it wasn't safe." "Did he say why?" She pressed gently. "Or mention anything specific perhaps about the manor, or something hidden?" Tommy's eyes flickered, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. But he stayed, scuffing his shoe in the dirt. He said there was stuff buried out there, stuff that didn't belong to nobody. I thought he was just trying to scare me." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "And did you ever see him digging, Tommy, or carrying anything?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Saw him once, late at night. He had a sack, looked heavy. He was heading toward the manor. This was new." Miss Marple kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. The manor again. If Finch was moving stolen goods to or from Sir Henry's estate, there might be more hidden there, perhaps something even Scotland Yard hadn't uncovered. She thanked Tommy, slipping him another peppermint, and made her way back to the village, her thoughts churning. By afternoon, Inspector Slack had arrived, his brisk manner filling the vicarage with an air of officious energy. He was a stocky man with a perpetually furrowed brow, and he greeted Miss Marple with a nod that bordered on dismissive. "Miss Marple," he said, "I hear you've been playing detective again. Lucky for us, but let's leave the rest to the professionals." "Of course, Inspector," she replied, her tone mild. "I wouldn't dream of interfering, but I did wonder if you'd searched the manor grounds thoroughly. There may be more to find." Slack's eyes narrowed. "We've got the box from the woods. That's evidence enough. Finch is singing like a canary, says he was working alone." Miss Marple doubted that, but held her tongue. Instead, she suggested a walk to the manor, ostensibly to stretch her legs. Slack agreed, if only to humour her, and they set off, with Constable Harris in tow. The manor grounds were quiet, the house still shuddered from Sir Henry's long absence. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the gardens, noting the overgrown hedges and the faint outline of a path leading to a dilapidated summer house. She paused, her gaze lingering on a patch of earth near the structure. It was subtly different, less compacted, as if recently disturbed. "Inspector," she said, pointing, "might that be worth a look?" Slack sighed, but nodded to Harris, who began to dig. Within minutes, his shovel hit metal a second box, larger than the first, containing more silver, a few jeweled brooches, and a small leather notebook. Slack's skepticism vanished as he opened the notebook, revealing a list of names, dates, and addresses, some local, others as far as London. "This is a ledger," Slack said, his voice tinged with excitement. "Names of buyers, maybe, or accomplices." Miss Marple peered over his shoulder, her eyes catching a familiar name: J. Carver, Mead. Mead was a neighbouring village, and J. Carver was a known antique dealer with a reputation for discretion. She filed this away, knowing it would require a delicate approach. Back at the vicarage, Slack was in high spirits, barking orders to Harris and telephoning Scotland Yard. Miss Marple, however, was troubled. The ledger suggested a network, and Finch's arrest might have alarmed his associates. If J. Carver was involved, he'd likely cover his tracks quickly. She needed to act before the trail went cold. That evening, she telephoned Sir Henry, who was still at the manor. "Jane, you've done it again," he said, chuckling. "Slack's claiming credit, of course, but he knows you pointed him to that box. I'm more concerned about this. J. Carver," she said. "If he's part of this, he'll know Finch has been caught. We need to watch him." Sir Henry agreed to arrange surveillance through Scotland Yard, but Miss Marple wasn't content to wait. She decided to visit Mead herself, under the guise of attending a flower show. The next morning, she caught the early bus, her handbag stocked with knitting and a small notebook of her own. Mead was larger than St. Mary Mead, with a bustling high street and a market square where the flower show was in full swing. J. Carver's shop was tucked down a side street, its windows displaying an array of antiques, vases, clocks, and silverware that gleamed with suspicious polish. Miss Marple entered, her demeanour that of a curious spinster. The shop was dim, its air heavy with the scent of old wood and polish. A man emerged from the back, tall and thin, with sharp eyes and a thin smile. "Good morning, madame. I'm James." Carver looking for anything special. Just browsing, Miss Marple said, her eyes scanning the shelves. You have such lovely things. Do you source them locally? Carver's smile tightened. Some local, some from farther afield. I deal in quality, wherever it comes from. She nodded, picking up a silver spoon that matched the style of Miss Hartnell's candlestick. This is charming. Did it come from a country house, perhaps? His eyes flickered, but he recovered quickly. An estate sale, I believe. I'd have to check my records. Miss Marple smiled, setting the spoon down. No need. I'm sure you're very thorough. She left the shop, her suspicions confirmed. Carver was too smooth, too guarded. She needed evidence, and she suspected Tommy Pierce might hold the final piece. Back in St. Mary Mead, she found Tommy at the village green, tossing stones into a pond. She approached carefully, sensing his wariness. Tommy, she said, I need your help. That sack you saw Mr. Finch carrying, did you ever see where he took it? Tommy's eyes darted away. Why do you keep asking me? I don't know. Nothing. I think you do, she said gently. And I think you're frightened. But you're a brave boy, Tommy, and I promise you'll be safe if you tell me. He hesitated, then spoke in a rush. I followed him once, to the old mill, out past the manor. He met someone there, man with a posh voice. They were talking about moving stuff, said it was going to London. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The old mill was abandoned, a perfect hiding place. She thanked Tommy, urging him to stay quiet, and hurried to the vicarage to telephone Sir Henry. By dusk, she, Sir Henry, and Constable Harris were at the mill, its crumbling walls shrouded in mist. Inside, they found crates stacked in a corner, filled with more stolen goods paintings, jewellery, even a small bronze statue. But the real find was a bundle of letters hidden beneath a floorboard, addressed to Finch, but signed with a single initial, C. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Carver. Sir Henry sent for Slack, and by morning James Carver was in custody, his shop searched and his records seized. The ledger and letters tied him to Finch and a network of thieves operating across the county. St. Mary Mead settled back into its quiet rhythm, but Miss Marple knew the villagers' calm was always temporary. As she sat by her fire that evening, her knitting needles clicking, she reflected on the case. Tommy's courage, Sir Henry's trust, even Slack's blusterel had played their part. But it was the small things, the whispers and glances, that had led her to the truth. And, in St. Mary Mead, there were always more secrets waiting to be heard. Chapter 3. The echoes of Dane Med's son hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green as Miss Jane Marple sat on a bench, her knitting bag at her side. The air was warm, scented with freshly cut grass and the faint tints of lavender from a nearby garden. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster enjoying the late afternoon. But her eyes were sharp, scanning the faces of passers-by. The arrest of Mr. Finch and James Carver had quieted the village's gossip for a day or two, but Miss Marple sensed a lingering unease, like a melody played just out of tune. The thefts had been uncovered, the culprits apprehended, yet something nagged at her, a loose thread in the tapestry of events that refused to be tied off. She had spent the morning at home, sifting through her notes and the fragments of conversation she'd collected over the past week. The ledger found at the manor had been a treasure trove, listing not only stolen items, but also a network of contacts stretching beyond Dane Mead to London and even farther afield. Scotland Yard, led by the ever-brusque Inspector Slack, was following those leads, but Miss Marple suspected the heart of the matter lay closer to home. Tommy Pierce's revelation about the old mill had been pivotal, but his mention of a posh voice lingered in her mind. It suggested someone of a different caliber from Finch or Carver, someone with influence, perhaps, or connections that reached beyond the petty world of stolen silver. As she sat, her needles clicking softly, a figure approached. Mrs. Price from the post office, her face flushed with the importance of fresh gossip. "Miss Marple, have you heard?" she said, barely pausing for breath. "There's been another theft this time in Mead. A pearl necklace, taken right from Mrs. Langley's bedroom at the Grange. Bold as brass, they say." Miss Marple's needles paused. "Mrs. Langley, you say? When did this happen?" "Last night, or so I heard," Mrs. Price replied, her eyes wide. "She's in a state, poor thing. Says it's worth a fortune, handed down from her grandmother. The police are there now, but folk are saying it's connected to that Finch business." "Thank you, Mrs. Price," Miss Marple said, her mind already racing. A theft so soon after Finch's arrest was no coincidence. Either the network was larger than Scotland Yard realized, or someone was taking advantage of the chaos to settle old scores. She gathered her things and decided to visit Mead again, this time with a clearer purpose. If the thefts were continuing, the answers might lie with Mrs. Langley or with someone close to her. The bus to Mead was crowded, filled with villagers heading to the market or the flower show's final day. Miss Marple sat near the back, her eyes half closed but her ears attuned to the chatter around her. A young woman, whom she recognized as Sarah Blacklock, a maid at the Grange, was whispering to a companion about Mrs. Langley's distress. "She's beside herself," Sarah said, "and not just about the necklace. Keeps saying someone's been in her study, moving papers. She's locked herself in her room and won't come out." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. Papers, not just jewellery. This was no ordinary theft. When the bus reached Mead, she made her way to the Grange, a handsome Georgian house surrounded by rose gardens and a high stone wall. She knocked, presenting herself as a concerned neighbour, a role she played with ease. Though few suspected the steel beneath her gentle demeanour, Mrs. Langley, a tall woman with greying hair and a nervous disposition, received her in the drawing room. Her hands twisted a laced handkerchief, and her eyes darted to the windows, as if expecting an intruder. "Miss Marple, is it?" she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know why you've come, but I'm in no state for visitors." "I understand," Miss Marple said soothingly, settling into a chair. "I heard about your necklace, and I thought you might need a sympathetic ear. These things can be so upsetting." Mrs. Langley's shoulders sagged. "It's not just the necklace, it's everything. My late husband's papers, his business records, they've been disturbed. I found them out of order this morning, and I'm certain someone's been through them. But who would want them? They're just old accounts, nothing valuable." Miss Marple's mind clicked like her knitting needles. "May I see the study?" Mrs. Langley. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes notices things others miss. Reluctantly, Mrs. Langley led her to a small, book-lined room at the back of the house. The desk was cluttered, but Miss Marple's keen gaze caught the signs of disturbance. A drawer slightly ajar, a ledger turned upside down, a pen left uncapped. She ran her fingers lightly over the papers, noting a faint smudge of ink on one page, a smudge that looked fresh. "Do you have many visitors to the house?" she asked casually. "Not many," Mrs. Langley said. "The vicar comes sometimes, and Mr. Carver used to, before, well, you know." And there's been a new man about the village, a Mr. Hargreaves. Says he's a historian, studying local estates. He was here last week, asking about my husband's collection of maps. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A historian, like Finch's claim of being a writer, was a convenient cover for someone with ulterior motives. Mr. Hargreaves, she repeated. Did he show particular interest in anything? Mrs. Langley frowned. He asked about an old map of the county, one my husband bought years ago. It's nothing special, just a curiosity, really. But he seemed keen to see it. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her thoughts swirling. A map, papers, a new theft. These were no random acts. She decided to visit the Mead vicarage, where the vicar, Mr. Denham, might know more about this. Mr. Hargreaves was a modest affair, its garden bursting with dahlias. Mr. Denham, a kindly man with a penchant for local history, welcomed her warmly. Miss Marple, what a pleasure, he said, offering tea. I suppose you're here about poor Mrs. Langley's troubles. In a way, she replied, sipping her tea. I'm curious about a Mr. Hargreaves. I understand he's been asking about historical maps. Mr. Denham's face lit up. Oh yes, a fascinating fellow. He's been researching the old estates, particularly the boundaries from the 18th century. He spent an afternoon here, looking through my records. Very knowledgeable, though a bit intense. Did he mention Mrs. Langley's map specifically? Miss Marple asked. He did, Mr. Denham said, nodding. Said it might show an old boundary line that's been forgotten. Something about a disputed plot near the old mill in St. Mary Mead. The old mill again. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The mill had been the site of Finch's rendezvous, and now it seemed connected to Hargreaves and Mrs. Langley's map. She thanked Mr. Denham and caught the next bus back to St. Mary Mead, her mind racing with possibilities. A map of a disputed plot could point to something valuable land, perhaps, or something buried on it. The theft of the necklace might be a distraction, a way to keep the police focused on petty crime while a larger scheme unfolded. Back in St. Mary Mead, she went straight to Sir Henry Clithering, who was still at the manor overseeing the cataloguing of the recovered stolen goods. She found him in the library, surrounded by papers and a hurried-looking Constable Harris. Jane, you look like you've got something on your mind, Sir Henry said, setting aside a ledger. I believe I do, she said, and recounted her visit to Danemead, the theft, the disturbed papers, and Hargreaves' interest in the map. I think this Mr. Hargreaves may be connected to Finch and Carver. The old mill keeps coming up, and I suspect there's something hidden. There's something tied to that map. Sir Henry's eyes narrowed. A map, you say? There's been talk of an old land dispute near the mill, dating back centuries. It's possible someone's after a claymore, something buried on the land. Miss Marple nodded. We need to find that map, and we need to watch Mr. Hargreaves. If he's in Danemead, he may move quickly now that Carver's been arrested. Sir Henry agreed to contact Inspector Slack, but Miss Marple wasn't content to wait. She decided to revisit the old mill, this time alone, to see if she could uncover any clues before Hargreaves or whoever he was working with could cover their tracks. She waited until dusk, when the village was settling into its evening quiet, and slipped out, her dark shawl blending into the shadows. The mill was a crumbling relic, its wheel long still, its walls overgrown with ivy. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of moss and decay. Miss Marple moved carefully, her torch casting a thin beam over the ground. She found the spot where the crates had been hidden, now empty, but her eyes caught something new, a faint outline in the dirt, as if a stone had been moved. She knelt, her fingers probing the soil, and uncovered a flat, heavy slab. With effort, she shifted it, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a leather pouch, and within it, a folded parchment-tan old map. Its edges frayed, but its lines clear. She studied it by torchlight, noting the boundaries of St. Mary, Mead, and Dane Mead, with a small plot near the mill marked in red ink. A tiny symbol, a cross, was drawn in the centre of the plot. Her heart raced. This was no ordinary map, was a guide to something hidden, something worth stealing for, perhaps even killing for. As she tucked the map into her bag, a twig snapped behind her. She froze, her torch flicking off. Footsteps approached, slow and deliberate. "Who's there?" a voice called, sharp and unfamiliar. It was a man's voice, polished but with an edge of menace. Hargreaves. She was certain. Miss Marple's mind raced. She was alone, unarmed, and far from help. But she was no stranger to danger, and her wits had always been her sharpest weapon. She stepped back into the shadows, her movements silent, and waited. The footsteps drew closer, and a figure emerged. Tall man with a lean face and cold eyes, his hand gripping a flashlight that swept the mill. "I know you're here," he said, his voice low. "Hand over the map, and there'll be no trouble." Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Agrabis, I presume. You're rather late to the game, I'm afraid." He spun toward her, his flashlight catching her in its beam. "You're that old woman from St. Mary Mead," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and disdain. "What do you know about this?" "Enough to know you're not a historian," she replied, stepping forward. "And enough to know that map is tied to something far more valuable than Mrs. Langley's necklace." Hargreaves' eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might lunge. But before he could, a shout rang out. Constable Harris, bless him, had followed her, alerted by Sir Henry's instincts. Hargreaves bolted, but Harris was faster, tackling him to the ground. Miss Marple stood calmly, the map secure in her bag. As Harris handcuffed the man by morning, Hargreaves was in custody, and the map was in Sir Henry's hands. It revealed a plot of land once owned by a wealthy family, rumoured to have buried a cache of gold during the Civil War. Hargreaves had been working with Finch and Carver to locate it, using the thefts as a cover to fund their search. The necklace, it turned out, had been stolen to throw the police off the scent. While Hargreaves rifled through Mrs. Langley's papers for the map, as Miss Marple sat in her cottage that evening, her knitting resumed its steady rhythm. The village was quiet again, the scandal fading into the rhythm of daily life. But she knew better than to trust the calm. St. Mary Mead, like any village, held its secrets close, and she would always be ready to listen when they whispered. Chapter 4. The Unseen Hand. The late summer sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden glow, softening the edges of the village's stone cottages and casting dappled light through the elms. Miss Jane Marple sat in her parlour, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, comforting rhythm. The arrests of Finch, Carver, and Hargreaves had restored a semblance of peace to the village, but Miss Marple's mind was far from settled. The map she'd found at the old mill, with its cryptic red cross marking a plot near the mill, hinted at a treasure far greater than the stolen trinkets, a cache of gold, perhaps hidden centuries ago. Yet something about the case felt unfinished, like a melody cut off mid-note. The players were in custody, but Miss Marple suspected an unseen hand was still pulling the strings. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the window where the village bustled quietly. The postman cycled past, and Mrs. Price's shop was busy with morning customers. To the untrained eye, all was well, but Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing human nature, told her otherwise. The map had been too carefully hidden, the thefts too meticulously planned for Hargreaves to be the mastermind. He was clever, yes, but his desperation at the mill suggested he was answering to someone else, someone with the cunning to stay in the shadows. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Dolly Bantry, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Jane, you'll never believe it," she exclaimed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "There's been another incident. Not a theft this time, but, well, it's odd. Old Mr. Grayson, from the edge of the village, claims someone's been digging in his garden. Says he found a hole near his apple trees, big enough for a man to hide in." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. "Digging, you say? When did he notice this?" "Last night," Dolly replied, settling into a chair. "He's in a right state, says it's vandals, but I thought of you straight away. It's too much like the business with the mill, don't you think?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind already weaving connections. Mr. Grayson's cottage was near the mill, on the same plot marked on the map. If someone was digging there, they were likely searching for the same treasure Hargreaves had been after. "I think I'll pay Mr. Grayson a visit," she said, rising. "Would you care to come along, Dolly?" Dolly, ever eager for adventure, agreed, and the two set off down the lane. Mr. Grayson's cottage was a modest affair, its garden a patchwork of vegetables and fruit trees. The old man himself was waiting by the gate, his face creased with worry. "Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry," he greeted, his voice gruff. "I don't know what's come over this village. First thieves, now this." He led them to the garden, where a deep hole marred the earth near an apple tree. The soil was freshly turned, and a spade lay discarded nearby, its handle worn but clean. Miss Marple knelt, examining the hole. It was wide, but not deep enough to suggest anything had been found. "Did you see anyone, Mr. Grayson?" she asked. "Not a soul," he grumbled. "But I heard noises rustling, like someone moving quick. By the time I got out here, they were gone." Miss Marple's eyes scanned the garden, noting a faint footprint in the soft earth a man's boot, by the size, with a distinctive tread. She filed this away, her thoughts turning to the map. If someone was still searching, they either hadn't found the treasure or believed there was more to uncover. She thanked Mr. Grayson and promised to inform the police, though she had no intention of leaving the matter to Inspector Slack's blunt methods. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple spread the map on her dining table, its faded lines glowing in the lamplight. The red cross was unmistakable, marking a spot just beyond the mill, perilously close to Mr. Grayson's garden. She traced the boundaries, noting how they aligned with old estate records she'd once seen at the vicarage. The land had belonged to the Ashford family, whose fortune had dwindled after the Civil War. The rumour of buried gold was an old one, whispered in village lore, but the map gave it substance. She needed to know more about the Ashfords and who else might know of their secret. Her next stop was the vicarage, where Mr. Clement kept a collection of local histories. He welcomed her with his usual warmth, though his eyes held a trace of unease. "Miss Marple, you're here about the Grayson business, I presume," he said, pouring tea. "The village is all atwitter." "In part," she replied, her tone light. "I'm also curious about the Ashford family. I believe they once owned the land near the mill. Do you have anything in your records about them?" Mr. Clement's face lit up. "Oh, yes. The Ashfords were quite prominent in their day. Let me fetch the parish records. He returned with a dusty volume, its pages yellowed but legible. Together they pored over entries from the 17th century, detailing the Ashfords' wealth and their sudden decline during the war. One entry caught Miss Marple's eye, a note about a family treasure hidden to protect it from Cromwell's forces. Its location known only to the eldest son, who died without revealing it. This is most helpful, Miss Marple said, her mind racing. The map was likely the key to that treasure, but who else knew of it? Hargreaves had been after it, but his polished voice and hasty actions suggested he was a hired man, not the architect of the scheme. She needed to find the person behind him, someone with the knowledge and resources to orchestrate such a plan. She left the vicarage. She noticed a figure lingering near the churchyard, a young woman, dressed in a plain coat, but with an air of nervous energy. Miss Marple recognized her as Ellen Carter, a maid who had recently left service at the Grange in Mead to work for Mrs. Price. Ellen's eyes darted about, and when she saw Miss Marple, she hurried away. The reaction was telling. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with her, but first she needed to revisit the mill. The mill was quiet in the fading light, its shadows deeper than before. Miss Marple moved cautiously, her torch sweeping the ground. She found the spot where she'd uncovered the map. But now there were fresh signs of disturbance, more footprints, matching the one in Mr. Grayson's garden, and a scrap of paper caught in the ivy. She picked it up, revealing a hastily scrawled note: "Meet at the Grange, midnight, bring the key." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the mention of the Grange sent a chill through her. Mrs. Langley's home was at the heart of this, and Ellen Carter, who had worked there, might know more than she let on. Miss Marple returned home, her thoughts in a whirl. She telephoned Sir Henry, who was still in St. Mary Mead, and shared her findings. "Jane, you're incorrigible," he said, half laughing. "But you're onto something. I'll have Harris watch the Grange tonight. If there's a meeting, we'll catch them." "I'd like to be there," Miss Marple said firmly. "I believe Ellen Carter is involved, and I may be able to coax her into talking." Sir Henry hesitated, but agreed, and at 11:30, Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Constable Harris were concealed in the shrubbery near the Grange. The night was still, the moon hidden by clouds. At midnight, two figures appeared at the garden gate. Ellen Carter, her face pale, and a man Miss Marple didn't recognize her, broad-shouldered figure with a low, commanding voice. They spoke in hushed tones, but Miss Marple caught fragments. "The map, not enough. The key is with her." Before she could hear more, Harris moved too quickly, rustling the bushes. The man spun, drawing a knife, but Sir Henry was faster, stepping forward with his revolver. "Drop it," he said, his voice steady. The man complied, and Ellen gasped, her hands flying to her face. "Ellen, dear," Miss Marple said, emerging from the shadows, "there's no need to be frightened. Tell us what you know, and we'll help you." Ellen's resolve crumbled, and she spoke in a rush. "It's Mr. Langley, Mrs. Langley's nephew, Richard. He's behind it all. He found an old letter in the Grange about the Ashford gold. He hired Finch and the others to find it, but they didn't know about the Keir locket, hidden in the Grange. I took the necklace to throw the police off, but Richard's got the locket now." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. The locket she'd seen in the first box of stolen goods, it wasn't just jewellery. It was the key to the treasure, likely containing a clue to its exact location. She turned to Richard Langley, who glared defiantly. "You're clever, old woman," he spat, "but you're too late. The gold's mine." "Not quite," Sir Henry said, as Harris handcuffed him. "We'll have that locket, and we'll find your gold." The locket was recovered from Richard's pocket, and inside was a tiny scrap of parchment with coordinates matching the map's red cross. By dawn, a search party led by Inspector Slack unearthed a chest in Mr. Grayson's garden, filled with gold coins and jewels enough to make the Ashford legend real. Richard Langley confessed to orchestrating the thefts, using Finch, Carver, and Hargreaves as pawns, with Ellen as his reluctant spy. As Miss Marple sat by her fire that evening, her knitting resumed its steady rhythm. The village was safe again, its secrets laid bare. But she knew St. Mary Mead would never stay quiet for long. There were always more threads to unravel, and she would be ready when they appeared. Chapter 5. The Unquiet Pass. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, draping the village in a veil of soft grey that muffled the usual clamour of roosters and rattling milk carts. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea, steaming beside a half-eaten scone, her eyes fixed on the garden beyond the window. The discovery of the Ashford gold had sent ripples through the village, with gossip swirling like leaves in an autumn wind. Richard Langley's arrest, along with the confessions of Finch, Carver, and Hargreaves, had tied up the thefts, neatly at least in the eyes of Inspector Slack and Scotland Yard. But Miss Marple's mind was not at ease. The gold, the map, the locket all pointed to a meticulously planned scheme. Yet something lingered, a shadow of doubt that refused to dissipate. She sipped her tea, her thoughts turning to Ellen Carter, the young maid who had played a reluctant role in Richard's plot. Ellen's tearful confession at the Grange had been illuminating, but her fear had been palpable, not just of Richard, but of something or someone else. Miss Marple had seen that look before, in villagers who knew more than they dared say. Ellen had mentioned a gentleman who visited Richard at the Grange, someone she described as cold as ice, with eyes like a hawk. This figure, absent from the ledger and unmentioned by the other conspirators, was a loose end Miss Marple could not ignore. As she buttered her scone, a knock at the door interrupted her reverie. It was Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Jane, I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said, stepping inside. "But there's been the strangest thing at the church. Someone left a note in the collection box and signed, but it's unsettling." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "A note. May I see it?" Mrs. Clement produced a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn as if handled repeatedly. The handwriting was elegant, almost too precise, and the message brief. "The gold is only the beginning. Beware the one who watches." Miss Marple's fingers traced the words, her mind racing. The note was a warning, but to whom? And who was the one who watches? "This was found this morning?" she asked, her voice calm but her eyes alert. "Yes, just after the early service," Mrs. Clement replied. "Mr. Clement thought it might be a prank, but I'm not so sure. After all that's happened at thefts. The gold, it feels like something more." Miss Marple agreed. The note's tone, its vague menace, suggested someone with knowledge of the Ashford treasure and its discovery. She tucked the paper into her pocket, promising to return it after a closer look, and decided to visit Ellen Carter. If anyone knew about this mysterious gentleman, it was likely her. Ellen worked at Mrs. Price's shop now. Having left the Grange after Richard's arrest, Miss Marple found her behind the counter, arranging jars of sweets with a distracted air. The shop was quiet, save for the faint jingle of the bell as Miss Marple entered. Ellen started, her hands trembling slightly. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I didn't expect you." "I won't keep you long, dear," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "But I need to ask about the gentleman you mentioned there, one who visited Mr. Langley. Can you tell me more about him?" Ellen's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. I shouldn't have said anything. He's dangerous, miss. I only saw him twice, but he scared me. Tall, thin, with a voice so quiet you had to strain to hear it. He wore a dark suit, always, and a hat pulled low. "Did he give a name?" Miss Marple pressed gently. Ellen shook her head. "Mr. Langley called him Mr. V, but I don't know if that's real. They talked in the study, late at night. I heard them mention the gold, and something about the others needing to be kept in line." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The others could mean Finch, Carver, and Hargreaves Orr. It could point to a larger network, one that hadn't been dismantled. She thanked Ellen, urging her to be careful, and left the shop, her thoughts turning to the note. Beware the one who watches. Mr. V, with his quiet voice and hawk-like eyes, fit the description all too well. Her next stop was Gossington Hall, where Dolly Bantry was eager to hear the latest developments. Over tea, Miss Marple shared the note and Ellen's story, watching Dolly's eyes widen with each detail. "Jane, this is dreadful," Dolly exclaimed. "Do you think this Mr. V is still out there, pulling strings?" "I fear he may be," Miss Marple said. "The gold was a significant find, but it's possible it was only part of his plan. We need to know who he is and what he wants." Dolly leaned forward, her voice a whisper. Arthur heard from Sir Henry that Scotland Yard found something odd in Carver's shop, a letter, addressed to no one, but mentioning a meeting in London. "They think it's unrelated, but—" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Nothing is unrelated, Dolly. Could you ask Colonel Bantry to get a copy of that letter? It might hold a clue." Dolly promised to try, and Miss Marple left, her mind buzzing. A letter in Carver's shop, a note in the church. A mysterious Mr. Vither. Pieces were scattered, but they were beginning to form a pattern. She decided to revisit the old mill, suspecting it held more secrets than the gold-filled chest. The mill was a nexus, a place where Finch, Hargreaves, and now this Mr. V had converged. The mill stood silent in the afternoon light, its crumbling walls casting jagged shadows. Miss Marple moved carefully, her torch illuminating the dusty interior. She found the spot where the chest had been unearthed, but her attention was drawn to a corner where the floorboards sagged. Kneeling, she pried one loose, revealing a small tin box. Inside was a single item, a photograph, faded but clear, showing 3 men standing before the mill. One was Richard Langley, younger and smiling. Another resembled Hargreaves. The third was a stranger, tall, thin, with a sharp face and eyes that seemed to pierce the camera. Miss Marple's breath caught. This was Mr. V, she was certain. She tucked the photograph into her bag and hurried to the manor to find Sir Henry. He was in the library, poring over estate records. "Jane, you look like you've found something," he said, setting aside his papers. She showed him the photograph, recounting Ellen's description and the church note. "This man, Mr. V, as Ellen called him, is the key. He's not in custody, and I believe he's still active, perhaps planning something bigger than the gold." Sir Henry's face grew serious. "If he's as dangerous as you suspect, we need to move quickly. I'll send this to Scotland Yard, see if they can identify him. But Jane, you must be careful. This man sounds like trouble." Miss Marple nodded, but her resolve was firm. She returned home, her mind racing. The photograph, the note, the digging in Mr. Grayson's garden all pointed to a scheme that hadn't ended with the arrests. She sat by her fire, knitting forgotten, and began to piece together a plan. Mr. V was watching, but so was she, and she had the advantage of being underestimated. The next morning, Colonel Bantry arrived with a letter from Carver's shop, courtesy of Sir Henry's connections. It was brief, written in the same precise hand as the church note. "Meet at the usual place, London, 10 p.m. The plan proceeds. V." The address was a nondescript pub in London's East End, a place Miss Marple knew from her nephew Raymond's stories of his bohemian days. She decided to go to London, but not alone. She would need Sir Henry's authority and Harris's strength. Convincing Sir Henry took some doing, but he relented, and the three of them caught the evening train to London. The pub, the Black Swan, was a smoky, crowded place, its patrons a mix of dock workers and shifty types. Miss Marple, dressed in her most unobtrusive grey, blended into the background, her eyes scanning the room. Sir Henry and Harris sat at a nearby table, posing as travellers. At precisely 10 p.m. A man entered, tall, thin, with a hat pulled low. Miss Marple's heart quickened. It was the man from the photograph. He sat in a corner, sipping a drink, his eyes darting about. A second man joined him, shorter and stocky, with a nervous demeanour. Their conversation was too low to hear, but Miss Marple noted the stocky man's agitation, his hands gesturing wildly. She leaned toward Sir Henry, whispering, "That's him, Mr. V. We need to follow him when he leaves." The meeting was brief, and Mr. V slipped out, the stocky man trailing behind. Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Harris followed at a distance. Weaving through London's foggy streets, they tracked him to a narrow alley, where he entered a nondescript building. Harris, ever eager, suggested storming in, but Miss Marple shook her head. "We need evidence," she said. "Let's watch and wait." They hid in the shadows, observing as Mr. V emerged an hour later, carrying a small case. He hailed a cab, and Sir Henry flagged another, instructing the driver to follow. The chase led to a warehouse near the docks, its windows dark. Miss Marple's instincts screamed danger, but she was undeterred. They crept closer, peering through a cracked window. Inside, Mr. V was unpacking the case, revealing documents and what looked like a small, ornate key. Before they could act, a shout rang out. Another man, hidden in the shadows, had spotted them. Mr. V spun, his eyes locking on to Miss Marple. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, his gaze cold and calculating. Then he bolted, the other man following. Harris gave chase, but Miss Marple stayed, her eyes on the case. She slipped inside, her torch illuminating the documents, letters, maps, and a list of names, some crossed out, others marked with dates. One name stood out: Lord Ashford, St. Mary Mead. Her heart raced. Lord Ashford, a distant descendant of the family, lived quietly in a neighbouring village. If he was involved, the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. She gathered the documents and retreated, rejoining Sir Henry outside. Harris returned, panting, having lost Mr. V in the maze of alleys. Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple pored over the documents with Sir Henry. The letters detailed a plan to claim the Ashford estate, using the gold as leverage to assert a legal right to the land. The key, it seemed, unlocked a hidden vault in the manor, rumoured to contain deeds proving the Ashfords' claim. Mr. V, whose real name was Victor Marwood, was a disgraced solicitor with a knack for forgery, hired by Lord Ashford to orchestrate the scheme. They confronted Lord Ashford the next day, presenting the documents. He crumbled, admitting his desperation to reclaim the family's lost wealth. Marwood had promised to deliver the deeds, using the thefts to fund the operation. With his confession, Scotland Yard arrested Marwood, tracked down through the pubs. Contacts. As Miss Marple sat by her fire that evening, her knitting resumed its steady rhythm. The village was quiet once more, its secrets laid bare. But she knew St. Mary Mead's calm was fleeting, and she would be ready for the next whisper of trouble. Chapter 6. The tangled web. The early autumn light filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished floorboards. She sat in her armchair, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting, needles moving with their familiar, soothing rhythm. Outside, St. Mary Mead was settling into its seasonal routine, with leaves turning amber and the air carrying a crisp bite. The village had exhaled a collective sigh of relief after the arrests of Richard Langley, Victor Marwood, and their accomplices, the Ashford gold safely in Scotland Yard's hands. Yet Miss Marple's mind was restless, her instincts whispering that the web of deceit spun around the treasure was not fully unravelled. The documents from Marwood's warehouse had revealed a plan to claim the Ashford estate. But there were hints, subtle, almost imperceptibly, a deeper motive, one that reached beyond gold or land. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to a small notebook on the table, where she'd jotted down details from the case, the map, the locket, the cryptic note in the church, and Marwood's chilling gaze in the London warehouse. One detail nagged at her: a name. In the documents, mentioned only once, almost as an afterthought, E. Blackwood. It was listed alongside a date and a vague reference to the arrangement. Miss Marple's memory, sharp as ever, recalled no Blackwood in St. Mary Mead or Dane Mead, but the name carried weight, like a shadow cast by an unseen figure. She resolved to investigate, but first she needed to revisit the village's pulsets. Gossip, its whispers, to see what else might surface. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Miss Hartnell, her face pinched with indignation. "Miss Marple, I simply must speak with you," she declared, bustling in without ceremony. "It's about that dreadful business with the gold. I've heard the most shocking thing, Mrs. Price says there's a stranger in the village again, seen near the churchyard last night, bold as you please, lurking about like a thief." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. A stranger, did Mrs. Price describe him? Not a him, a her, Miss Hartnell corrected, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A woman, youngish, with dark hair and a city look about her. Mrs. Price saw her near the lich gate, carrying a bag. She thinks it's connected to the thefts, but I say it's nonsense. Those men are locked up, aren't they? Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A woman, a new figure in the village, was an unexpected twist. "Thank you, Miss Hartnell," she said, her tone mild. "I'll look into it. One can never be too careful." After Miss Hartnell left, Miss Marple donned her coat and hat, her steps purposeful as she headed toward the churchyard. The lich, an ancient structure of weathered oak, stood at the entrance to the church grounds, its shadow a favourite spot for discreet meetings. She examined the ground, noting fresh footprints in the soft earth small, with a narrow heel, suggesting a woman's shoe. Nearby, caught on a splinter of the gate, was a single dark hair, long and glossy. Miss Marple tucked it into an envelope, her thoughts turning to the name E. Blackwood. Could this woman be the elusive figure mentioned in Marwood's documents? Her next stop was Mrs. Price's shop, where the postmistress was eager to share. Her tale, I saw her clear as day, Miss Marple, Mrs. Price said, leaning over the counter. She was there just after dusk, looking nervous. Had a scarf over her face, but I'd know those eyes anywhere sharp, like she was watching everything. Did she speak to anyone? Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but probing. Not that I saw, Mrs. Price replied, but she went toward the vicarage, then doubled back to the lane by the mill. I thought it odd, with all that's happened there. The mill again. Miss Marple thanked her and left, her mind weaving connections. The mill had been the heart of the Ashford gold scheme, and now this mysterious woman was drawn to it. She decided to visit the vicarage, hoping Mr. or Mrs. Clement had noticed something. The vicarage was quiet, its garden a riot of late-blooming roses. Mrs. Clement welcomed her with a tray of tea and biscuits, her face clouded with worry. "Jane, I'm glad you're here," she said, pouring tea. "There's been something strange. A woman came to the vicarage yesterday, asking about old parish records. She said she was researching family history, but she was evasive, wouldn't give her name, and she left quickly when I asked questions." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. What did she look like? Young, perhaps 30, with dark hair and a refined way about her. Mrs. Clement said she was particularly interested in the Ashford family, asked about their old estate boundaries, the same ones you were looking at. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This woman was no casual historian. Did she take anything or leave anything behind? Mrs. Clement shook her head. "Not that I noticed, but I found this near the gate after she left." She produced a small, embossed card, blank except for a single initial. E. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. E. Blackwood, perhaps. The card was a clue, subtle but significant, and she tucked it into her bag. That afternoon, she telephoned Sir Henry Clethering, who was back in London but planning to return to St. Mary Mead. She shared her findings, the stranger, the footprints, the card, and the name E. Blackwood. "Jane, you're uncanny," Sir Henry said, his voice warm with admiration. "I'll check Scotland Yard's records for this Blackwood. But be careful, this sounds like it's not over yet." Miss Marple agreed, but caution was second nature to her. She decided to revisit the mill, suspecting the woman had been searching for something Marwood's group had missed. The mill was shrouded in evening mist, its silence broken only by the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple moved carefully, her torch casting a thin beam over the ground. She found the spot where the gold had been unearthed, but her attention was drawn to a pile of stones near the mill's foundation, slightly displaced. Kneeling, she shifted them, revealing a small, rusted tin hidden beneath. Inside was a folded letter, its paper brittle but intact, addressed to E.B. in a hand that matched Marwood's. The letter was cryptic, mentioning the final piece, and the manor's secret. It spoke of a vault, not at the mill but within the Ashford manor itself, hidden behind the third panel. Miss Marple's heart raced. The manor, now under Sir Henry's care, had been searched, but not thoroughly enough, it seemed. She tucked the letter into her bag and hurried back to the village, her steps quick despite the gathering dark dot at home. She examined the letter by lamplight, her mind piecing together the clues. The vault, the manor, E. Blackwood. This woman was likely the mastermind Marwood had served, the one who stayed in the shadows while others took the risks. But why the manor, and what was the final piece? She needed to see the manor again. and she needed Sir Henry's help. The next morning, Sir Henry arrived, his face grim. "Scotland Yard found a record of an Eleanor Blackwood," he said, settling into her parlour. "She's a known associate of Marwood's, a forger and swindler with a knack for disappearing. No photograph, but she fits your description. Hair, sharp eyes, about 30. Miss Marple nodded, showing him the letter. "I believe she's after something in the manor vault, perhaps containing more than gold. We need to search it before she does." Sir Henry agreed, and they gathered Constable Harris and a reluctant Inspector Slack, who grumbled about meddling spinsters, but followed. The manor was quiet, its halls echoing with the weight of centuries. They focused on the library, where Miss Marple suspected the third panel might be. The walls were lined with oak panels, intricately carved. She counted carefully, her fingers tracing the wood, and paused at the third panel from the fireplace. A faint seam suggested a hidden compartment. Harris, with his usual enthusiasm, pressed the panel, and it clicked open, revealing a narrow space. Inside was a small, locked box, its surface engraved with the Ashford crest. Slack's eyes widened. But before they could open it, a noise echoed from the hall, a soft footstep, deliberate and cautious. Miss Marple's heart quickened. "She's here," she whispered. They moved silently, Harris leading the way. In the hall they found her Eleanor Blackwood, her dark hair glinting in the dim light, a crowbar in her hand. She froze, her eyes locking on to Miss Marple's. "You," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You've been a thorn in my side." "And you've been careless," Miss Marple replied, her tone calm. "You should have stayed away from the mill." Eleanor lunged, but Harris was faster, pinning her arms. She struggled, her eyes blazing, but Sir Henry's revolver ensured her compliance. They opened the box, revealing not gold but documents deep, letters and a will, proving the Ashfords' claim to a vast estate in London, long thought lost. Eleanor had planned to forge new documents, using the originals to claim the estate for herself. As Eleanor was led away, Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in the manor's library. The documents spread before them. "You've done it again, Jane," he said, shaking his head. "How do you see what we all miss?" She smiled, her knitting resumed. "I simply listen, Henry. People talk, and the truth slips out, if you know where to look." That evening, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her needles clicking. St. Mary Mead was calm, but she knew its secrets would never stay buried for long. She would be ready when they surfaced again. Chapter 7. The Silent Witness. The autumn chill had settled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of russet and gold. The leaves crunched underfoot as Miss Jane Marple made her way along the high street, her black patent shoes tapping a steady rhythm. Her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, a familiar companion, but her mind was far from the skeins of wool within. The arrest of Eleanor Blackwood had closed another chapter in the saga of the Ashford gold, yet Miss Marple's instincts whispered of a lingering shadow. The documents found in the manor's hidden vault deeds, letters, and a will had secured the Ashford estate's rightful ownership, but a single line in one of the letters haunted her. "The silent witness holds the final truth." It was cryptic, unsigned, and written in a hand that matched none of the conspirators. Miss Marple suspected the web of intrigue extended further, perhaps into the heart of the village itself. She paused by the village green, her eyes scanning the familiar scene, children playing near the pond, Mrs. Price sweeping her shop's doorstep, and the vicar's bicycle leaning against the churchyard wall. To the untrained eye, St. Mary Mead was a picture of tranquility, but Miss Marple knew better. The village was a tapestry of secrets, woven from whispers and glances, and she was adept at unpicking its threads. The silent witness could be a person, a place, or even an object, but its mention suggested someone or something had been overlooked. Her thoughts were interrupted by the approach of young Tommy Pierce, his cap askew and his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Since his reluctant help in uncovering Richard Langley's scheme, he'd been quieter, almost subdued, as if carrying a weight he couldn't share. Miss Marple smiled warmly, offering a peppermint from her bag. "Tommy dear, you look troubled. Is everything all right?" He shrugged, his eyes darting to the ground. "Just things, miss. People keep asking me stuff about the gold and all. I don't know nothing more, honest." "I believe you," she said gently, her voice soothing. "But you've a sharp pair of eyes, Tommy. Have you seen anything odd lately? Near the church or the manor?" Tommy hesitated, then nodded slowly. "There's this old man, Mr. Tuttle, from the cottages by the lane. He's been acting funny, keeps wandering near the church at night, muttering to himself. I heard him say something about watching it all the other day." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Mr. Tuttle was a reclusive figure, a retired gardener who rarely spoke to anyone. Could he be the silent witness? She thanked Tommy, slipping him another peppermint, and made her way toward the cottages, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The letter's phrase suggested someone who had seen or known something vital, but had chosen to remain silent, perhaps out of fear or loyalty or something else entirely. Mr. Tuttle's cottage was a ramshackle affair, its garden overgrown with weeds despite his years as a gardener. Miss Marple knocked, her knock light but firm. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a stooped figure with rheumy eyes and a face creased like old leather. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff, "what do you want with an old man like me?" "Just a neighbourly visit," she replied, her smile disarming. "I heard you've been taking evening walks near the church. It's a lovely spot, isn't it?" Tuttle's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, letting her in. The cottage was cluttered with stacks of yellowed newspapers and gardening tools scattered about. "I walk where I please," he said, settling into a worn chair. "Churchyard's quiet. Good place to think." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the room. A small, locked box sat on a shelf, its surface dusty but its lock gleaming, as if recently used. "You've lived here a long time, Mr. Tuttle," she said. "You must have seen a great deal over the years, things others might miss." He grunted, his fingers twitching. "Seen plenty, don't mean I talk about it." "Of course," she said, her tone light, "but sometimes silence can be a burden. If you've seen something perhaps about the manor, or the people who've come and gone, it might help put things right." Tuttle's eyes flicked to the box, then back to her. "You're a nosy one, ain't you? I don't know nothing about no gold, if that's what you're after." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. "I'm not after gold, Mr. Tuttle. I'm after the truth. There's a difference." He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed, his shoulders sagging. "All right, I saw something years ago, back when the Ashfords still owned the manor. Old Lord Ashford, before he died, he used to meet a man in the churchyard late at night. Never saw his face clear, but he was tall, spoke soft. They talked about hiding something, not just gold, papers, maybe. I kept quiet, 'cause it wasn't my place." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "And recently, have you seen anyone like that man?" Tuttle hesitated, then nodded. Couple weeks back, near the Lich Gate. Same sort all, quiet. Watching the manor, like he was waiting for something. I didn't stick around to see more. She thanked him, her mind racing. A tall, quiet man, reminiscent of Victor Marwood. But not him. Marwood was in custody. This could be another associate, or the true mastermind behind the scheme. The locked box on Tuttle's shelf nagged at her, but she didn't press. Instead, she left, promising to send him some of her homemade jam, and headed to the vicarage to consult the parish records again. Mr. Clement was in his study, surrounded by books and papers. He welcomed her warmly, though his face showed the strain of recent events. "Miss Marple, you're a regular visitor these days," he said, offering tea. "More questions about the Ashfoots?" "Yes," she replied, settling into a chair. "I'm curious about visitors to the manor, particularly in the years before old Lord Ashford's death. Mr. Tuttle mentioned a man who met him in the churchyard, tall, soft-spoken. Does that ring a bell?" Mr. Clement frowned, tapping his fingers on the desk. "There was a gentleman, years ago, Mr. Vernon, I believe. He was a solicitor. Came down from London to advise Lord Ashford on estate matters. I don't recall much about him, but he was quiet, very reserved. The records might have more." They pored over the parish archives, finding a few entries mentioning a Mr. Charles Vernon, who visited St. Mary Mead sporadically in the 1890s. One note stood out. Vernon had overseen the transfer of certain family documents to a secure location, unspecified but hinted to be within the manor. Miss Marple's thoughts returned to the vault behind the third panel. Could there be another hidden compartment, overlooked in the search? She thanked Mr. Clement and made her way to the manor where Sir Henry Clithering was staying while sorting out the Ashford estate's legalities. She found him in the library, surrounded by ledgers and maps. "Jane, you look like you've got a bee in your bonnet," he said, smiling. "What's it this time?" She recounted Tuttle's story and the parish records, focusing on Charles. "Vernon, I believe there's another vault in the manor, Henry, and someone is still after its contents. The letter mentioned a silent witness, and I think it refers to something or someone who saw the hiding of those documents long ago." Sir Henry's eyes narrowed. "Another vault. We searched that library thoroughly, but you've a knack for finding what we miss. Let's take another look." They returned to the library, joined by Constable Harris, who was growing accustomed to Miss Marple's hunches. She directed them to the opposite wall, counting panels until she reached the third from the window. A faint discoloration caught her arger seam, almost invisible. Harris pressed it, and with a soft click, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow space. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Lord Ashford's meticulous handwriting. Miss Marple opened it, her fingers trembling slightly. The journal detailed a secret agreement with Charles Vernon, who had hidden a second set of documents, proof of a royal grant to the Ashfords guaranteeing their claim to a vast tract of land in London's West End, worth millions today. The grant had been concealed to protect it from rival claimants, with Vernon as its guardian. But Vernon had vanished after Lord Ashford's death, and the journal hinted at his betrayal a plan to sell the grant to a foreign buyer. "This is explosive," Sir Henry said, his voice low. "If someone's after this, they're playing for stakes far beyond the gold." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts turning to the stranger Tuttle had seen. "We need to find this Mantha, one watching the manor. He may be Vernon's successor, or someone he confided in." That evening, Miss Marple and Sir Henry set a trap. They spread word through Mrs. Price's shop that a significant find had been made at the manor, hoping to lure the stranger out. By midnight, they were hidden in the churchyard, Harris stationed nearby. The night was still, the air heavy. With mist, at 12:30, a figure appeared tall, lean, moving with a predator's grace. He paused at the lich gate, his eyes scanning the darkness. Miss Marple held her breath, her hand tightening on her torch. The man moved toward the manor, but Harris was ready, stepping out with a shout. The stranger turned, his face briefly illuminated. Sharp, angular face, not unlike Marwood's, but older, more weathered. He bolted, but Harris was faster, tackling him to the ground. The man, who identified himself as Edward Vance, confessed under pressure. He was Vernon's nephew, raised on stories of the hidden grant. He'd been watching St. Mary Mead for years, waiting for the right moment to claim it. Marwood and Blackwood had been his tools, but he'd stayed in the shadows, directing their moves. The journal was his goal, the key to a fortune he believed was his birthright. As Vance was led away, Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in the manor's library, the journal open before them. "You've done it again, Jane," he said, shaking his head. "Scotland Yard will have a field day with this." She smiled, her knitting needles clicking once more. "It's the small things, Henry, the whispers, the glances. They always tell the truth, if you listen." Back in her cottage, as the fire crackled and the village slept, Miss Marple reflected on the case. St. Mary Mead was quiet again, its secrets laid bare. But she knew the calm was temporary, and she would be ready when the next thread appeared, waiting to be unravelled. Chapter 8. The Hidden Motive. The autumn dusk settled over St. Mary Mead like a soft blanket, the village's chimneys puffing gentle curls of smoke into the cooling air. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles moving, with their familiar, almost meditative rhythm. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room, but her thoughts were far from cosy. The arrest of Edward Vance, the shadowy figure behind the Ashford gold conspiracy, had brought a semblance of closure to the village. The journal found in the manor's hidden vault, detailing a royal grant worth millions, had been handed over to Scotland Yard, and the Ashford estate's future was secure. Yet Miss Marple's sharp mind was troubled by a nagging sense of incompletion. The journal had mentioned a final guardian, a figure entrusted with protecting the grant's secret, and Vance's confession, though detailed, had carefully avoided naming this person. Miss Marple suspected the true architect of the scheme was still at large, hidden in plain sight. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the notebook where she'd recorded every clue, every whisper from the past weeks. The phrase, "the silent witness from the previous letter," still echoed in her mind, but now she wondered if it referred not to a person or place, but to a secret, a truth so well concealed it had watched over St. Mary Mead for generations. The journal's mention of a final guardian suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the Ashford family, perhaps even a descendant or a trusted confidant. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village itself, its quiet lanes and familiar faces. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were never far from the surface, and she was determined to unearth this last one. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Dolly Bantry, her face alight with the thrill of fresh gossip. "Jane, you won't believe what's happened," she exclaimed, bustling in with a gust of autumn air. "Mrs. Price says there's been a stranger scene near the old Ashford crypt in the churchyard last night, just after moonrise. A man, she thinks, though it was too dark to be sure. She's convinced it's another thief. But I thought of you. At once, Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. The Ashford crypt. That's curious. Did Mrs. Price see anything else, perhaps what he was doing? She said he was poking about the crypt's entrance, like he was looking for something, Dolly replied, settling into a chair. He vanished when she called out, "Jane, do you think it's connected to the gold?" "I thought we'd caught them all." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "We've caught many, Dolly, but not all. The crypt is an interesting choice. It's not been opened in years, but it's part of the Ashford legacy, I think. A visit is in order." She donned her coat and hat, her walking stick tapping lightly as she and Dolly made their way to the churchyard. The Ashford crypt was a weathered stone structure, half hidden by ivy, its iron gate rusted but intact. Miss Marple examined the ground, noting fresh scratches on the gate's lock, as if someone had tried to pry it open. A faint smudge of chalk marked the stone near by a deliberate sign, she thought, perhaps left to guide someone else. She bent closer, her eyes catching a tiny scrap of fabric caught in the ivy. Dark green and finely woven, unlike the rough cloth of a villager's coat. "This is no casual visitor," she murmured, tucking the fabric into an envelope. "Someone is searching for something specific, and they know where to look." Dolly shivered, glancing at the darkening sky. "Jane, this gives me the creeps. What could be in there? More gold, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps something more valuable, a secret, one the final guardian is desperate to protect." They returned to Miss Marple's cottage, where she spread the journal on her table, its pages worn but legible. The mention of the final guardian was brief, but it hinted at a vow made by Lord Ashford's closest friend, a man named William Harrow. Harrow had been a minor figure in the parish records, a scholar who lived quietly in St. Mary Mead until his death in the early 1900s. His descendants, if any, might still be in the area, and Miss Marple suspected one of them could be the key to the crypt's mystery. Her next move was to visit the vicarage, where Mr. Clement's records might shed light on the Harrow family. The vicar welcomed her with his usual warmth, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple, you're relentless," he said, offering tea. "I suppose this is about the Ashford business again." "Indeed," she replied, sipping her tea. "I'm curious about William Harrow, a friend of the Ashfords. Do you have any records of his family, or perhaps his descendants?" Mr. Clement frowned, rubbing his chin. "Harrow, yes, I recall the name. He was a quiet man, a bit of a recluse. Let me check." He retrieved a heavy ledger, its pages filled with births, marriages, and deaths. After some searching, he found an entry. William Harrow had a daughter, Margaret, who married a local farmer, Thomas Reed. Their only child, Eliza Reed, was still alive, living in a cottage on the outskirts of Mead. "Eliza Reed," Miss Marple repeated, her mind clicking like her knitting needles. "Does she ever visit St. Mary Mead?" "Not often," Mr. Clement said. "She's a private sort, keeps to herself, but I've seen her at the church occasionally, usually for the early service." Miss Marple thanked him and left, her thoughts turning to Eliza Reed. If she was Harrow's granddaughter, she might know of the final guardian or the crypt's significance. The next morning, Miss Marple caught the bus to Mead, her handbag stocked with knitting and her notebook. Eliza's cottage was a neat, ivy-covered dwelling, its garden meticulously tended. Miss Marple knocked, and after a moment, a woman answered, tall, with greying hair and sharp, watchful eyes. She wore a dark green shawl, the same shade as the fabric from the crypt. Miss Reed, Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. I'm Jane Marple from St. Mary Mead. I was hoping to speak with you about your family's history. Eliza's eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside. Come in then. I don't get many visitors. The cottage was sparse but tidy, with a small desk covered in papers. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a photograph of an older man, William Harrow. She suspected his features echoed in Eliza's sharp cheekbones. Your grandfather was William Harrow, I believe, she said, settling into a chair. A friend of the Ashfords. I'm researching their history, particularly anything tied to the manor. Eliza's hands tightened on her teacup. Grandfather was a private man. Didn't talk much about the Ashfords. Why do you ask? Miss Marple chose her words carefully. There's been some activity at the Ashford crypt. I thought you might know why someone would be interested in it. Eliza's face remained impassive, but her eyes flickered. The crypt's old, falling apart. Nothing in there but bones. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone light. But old places hold old secrets. Your grandfather was close to Lord Ashford. Did he ever mention a vow or a duty to protect? Something. Eliza hesitated, then shook her head. You're fishing, Miss Marple. I've nothing to tell you. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. She left the cottage, but not before noting a small key on Eliza's desk, its shape similar to the one found in Marwood's warehouse. Her suspicions deepened. Eliza was hiding something, and the crypt was the key. That evening she telephoned. Sir Henry Clithering, who had returned to St. Mary Mead to finalize the Ashford estate's transfer. Jane, you're tireless, he said, chuckling. What's this about a crypt? She recounted her findings, the stranger at the crypt, the fabric, and Eliza Reed's guarded demeanor. I believe there's something hidden there, Henry, and Eliza may be protecting it. We need to search the crypt, but discreetly. Sir Henry agreed, and they arranged to meet at the churchyard at dusk, with Constable Harris in tow. Inspector Slack, predictably, grumbled about wild goose chases, but he joined them, his curiosity piqued. The crypt's iron gate creaked as Harris forced it open, revealing a damp, stone-lined chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of mould and thyme. Miss Marple's torch swept the walls, pausing on a loose slab near the back. Harris pried it open, revealing a small, locked box, its surface engraved with the Ashford crest. Before they could open it, a shadow moved at the entrance. Eliza Reed, her face pale but resolute, a small pistol in her hand. Step away, she said, her voice steady. That's mine. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her voice was calm. Elisa, dear, there's no need for that. We only want the truth. Your grandfather was the final guardian, wasn't he? Eliza's eyes widened, the pistol wavering. How did you know? The journal, Miss Marple said softly. And your reaction? You've been protecting something all these years, haven't you? Eliza's shoulders sagged, the pistol lowering. Grandfather swore to keep it safe, a letter, proving the Ashfords' claim was a fraud. The royal grant was forged, a lie to secure their wealth. If it came out, the estate would collapse, and St. Mary Mead with it. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. You were at the crypt, trying to move it. Eliza nodded, tears in her eyes. I thought if I hid it elsewhere, no one would find it. But you see everything. Harris took the pistol, and Sir Henry opened the box, revealing a single letter, its wax seal broken but intact. It confirmed Eliza's story, a confession from Lord Ashford's father, admitting the forgery. The truth would have ruined the family, and St. Mary Mead's economy, tied to the estate, would have suffered. Chapter 8. The Hidden Motive. The autumn dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, like a soft blanket, the village's chimneys puffing gentle curls of smoke into the cooling air. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles moving. With their familiar, almost meditative rhythm, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room, but her thoughts were far from cosy. The arrest of Edward Vance, the shadowy figure behind the Ashford gold conspiracy, had brought a semblance of closure to the village. The journal found in the manor's hidden vault, detailing a royal grant worth millions, had been handed over to Scotland Yard, and the Ashford estate's future was secure. Yet Miss Marple's sharp mind was troubled by a nagging sense of incompletion. The journal had mentioned a final guardian, a figure entrusted with protecting the grant's secret, and Vance's confession, though detailed, had carefully avoided naming this person. Miss Marple suspected the true architect of the scheme was still at large, hidden in plain sight. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the notebook where she'd recorded every clue, every whisper from the past weeks. The phrase, "the silent witness" from the previous letter still echoed in her mind, but now she wondered if it referred not to a person or place, but to a secret, a truth so well concealed it had watched over St. Mary Mead for generations. The journal's mention of a final guardian suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the Ashford family, perhaps even a descendant or a trusted confidant. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village itself, its quiet lanes and familiar faces. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were never far from the surface, and she was determined to unearth this last one. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Dolly Bantry, her face alight with the thrill of fresh gossip. "Jane, you won't believe what's happened," she exclaimed, bustling in with a gust of autumn air. "Mrs. Price says there's been a stranger seen near the old Ashford crypt in the churchyard last night, just after moonrise. A man, she thinks, though it was too dark to be sure. She's convinced it's another thief, but I thought of you." At once, Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. The Ashford crypt. That's curious. Did Mrs. Price see anything else, perhaps what he was doing? She said he was poking about the crypt's entrance, like he was looking for something, Dolly replied, settling into a chair. He vanished when she called out, "Jane, do you think it's connected to the gold? I thought we'd caught them all." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. "We've caught many, Dolly, but not all. The crypt is an interesting choice. It's not been opened in years, but it's part of the Ashford legacy, I think. A visit is in order." She donned her coat and hat, her walking stick tapping lightly as she and Dolly made their way to the churchyard. The Ashford crypt was a weathered stone structure, half hidden by ivy, its iron gate rusted but intact. Miss Marple examined the ground, noting fresh scratches on the gate's lock, as if someone had tried to pry it open. A faint smudge of chalk marked the stone nearby, a deliberate sign, she thought, perhaps left to guide someone else. She bent closer, her eyes catching a tiny scrap of fabric caught in the ivy, dark green and finely woven, unlike the rough cloth of a villager's coat. "This is no casual visitor," she murmured, tucking the fabric into an envelope. "Someone is searching for something specific, and they know where to look." Dolly shivered, glancing at the darkening sky. "Jane, this gives me the creeps. What could be in there?" "More gold, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps something more valuable, a secret one the final guardian is desperate to protect. They returned to Miss Marple's cottage, where she spread the journal on her table, its pages worn but legible. The mention of the final guardian was brief, but it hinted at a vow made by Lord Ashford's closest friend, a man named William Harrow. Harrow had been a minor figure in the parish records, a scholar who lived quietly in St. Mary Mead until his death in the early 1900s. His descendants, if any, might still be in the area, and Miss Marple suspected one of them could be the key to the crypt's mystery. Her next move was to visit the vicarage, where Mr. Clement's records might shed light on the Harrow family. The vicar welcomed her with his usual warmth, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Miss Marple, you're relentless," he said, offering tea. "I suppose this is about the Ashford business again." "Indeed," she replied, sipping her tea. "I'm curious about William Harrow, a friend of the Ashfords. Do you have any records of his family, or perhaps his descendants?" Mr. Clement frowned, rubbing his chin. "Harrow, yes, I recall the name. He was a quiet man, a bit of a recluse. Let me check." He retrieved a heavy ledger, its pages filled with births, marriages, and deaths. After some searching, he found an entry. William Harrow had a daughter, Margaret, who married a local farmer, Thomas Reed. Their only child, Eliza Reed, was still alive, living in a cottage on the outskirts of Danemead. "Eliza Reed," Miss Marple repeated, her mind clicking like her knitting needles. "Does she ever visit St. Mary Mead?" "Not often," Mr. Clement said. "She's a private sort, keeps to herself, but I've seen her at the church occasionally, usually for the early service." Miss Marple thanked him and left, her thoughts turning to Eliza Reed. If she was Harrow's granddaughter, she might know of the final guardian or the crypt's significance. The next morning, Miss Marple caught the bus to Danemead, her handbag stocked with knitting and her notebook. Eliza's cottage was a neat, ivy-covered dwelling, its garden meticulously tended. Miss Marple knocked, and after a moment, a woman answered, tall, with greying hair and sharp, watchful eyes. She wore a dark green shawl, the same shade as the fabric from the crypt. "Miss Reed," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "I'm Jane Marple from St. Mary Mead. I was hoping to speak with you about your family's history." Eliza's eyes narrowed, but she stepped aside. "Come in, then. I don't get many visitors." The cottage was sparse but tidy, with a small desk covered in papers. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on a photograph of an older man, William Harrow. She suspected his features echoed in Eliza's sharp cheekbones. "Your grandfather was William Harrow, I believe," she said, settling into a chair. "A friend of the Ashfords. I'm researching their history, particularly anything tied to the manor." Eliza's hands tightened on her teacup. "Grandfather was a private man, didn't talk much about the Ashfords." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple chose her words carefully. "There's been some activity at the Ashford crypt. I thought you might know why someone would be interested in it." Eliza's face remained impassive, but her eyes flickered. "The crypt's old, falling apart. Nothing in there but bones." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone light. "But old places hold old secrets. Your grandfather was close to Lord Ashford. Did he ever mention a vow or a duty to protect?" "Something." Eliza hesitated, then shook her head. "You're fishing, Miss Marple. I've nothing to tell you." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. She left the cottage, but not before noting a small key on Eliza's desk, its shape similar to the one found in Marwood's warehouse. Her suspicions deepened. Eliza was hiding something, and the crypt was the key. That evening, she telephoned Sir Henry Clithering, who had returned to St. Mary Mead to finalize the Ashford estate's transfer. "Jane, you're tireless," he said, chuckling. "Was this about a crypt?" She recounted her findings, the stranger at the crypt, the fabric, and Eliza Reed's guarded demeanor. "I believe there's something hidden there, Henry. And Eliza may be protecting it. We need to search the crypt, but discreetly." Sir Henry agreed, and they arranged to meet at the churchyard at dusk, with Constable Harris in tow. Inspector Slack, predictably, grumbled about wild goose chases, but he joined them, his curiosity piqued. The crypt's iron gate creaked as Harris forced it open, revealing a damp, stone-lined chamber. The air was heavy with the scent of mould and thyme. Miss Marple's torch swept the walls, pausing on a loose slab near the back. Harris pried it open, revealing a small, locked box, its surface engraved with the Ashford crest. Before they could open it, a shadow moved at the entrance. Eliza Reed, her face pale but resolute, a small pistol in her hand. "Step away," she said, her voice steady. "That's mine." Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her voice was calm. "Eliza dear, there's no need for that. We only want the truth. Your grandfather was the final guardian, wasn't he?" Eliza's eyes widened, the pistol wavering. "How did you know?" "The journal," Miss Marple said softly. "And your reaction. You've been protecting something all these years, haven't you?" Eliza's shoulders sagged. The pistol. Lowering, grandfather swore to keep it safe. A letter, proving the Ashfords' claim was a fraud. The royal grant was forged, a lie to secure their wealth. If it came out, the estate would collapse, and St. Mary Mead with it. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gentle. "You were at the crypt, trying to move it." Eliza nodded, tears in her eyes. "I thought if I hid it elsewhere, no one would find it. But you see everything." Harris took the pistol, and Sir Henry opened the box, revealing a single letter, its wax seal broken but intact. It confirmed Eliza's story, a confession from Lord Ashford's father, admitting the forgery. The truth would have ruined the family, and St. Mary Mead's economy, tied to the estate, would have suffered. Chapter 9. The fading echoes. The late autumn wind swept through St. Mary Mead, rattling the bare branches of the elms and sending leaves skittering across the cobblestones. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cosy parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly as a fire crackled in the hearth. The village had settled into a fragile calm after the revelation of the Ashford forgery. With Eliza Reed's confession and the hidden letter now safely in Sir Henry Clithering's hands, the decision to keep the truth buried had preserved the village's stability, but Miss Marple's mind was far from at rest. The web of secrets surrounding the Ashford estate felt too vast, too intricate, to end with a single letter. Her instincts, honed by years of observing the quiet undercurrents of human nature, whispered that one final piece of the puzzle remained hidden, a motive or a player yet to be revealed. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the window, where the village lay bathed in the pale light of a November afternoon. The high street was quiet, with only a few villagers hurrying home before the evening chill set in. To the casual observer, St. Mary Mead was a picture of serenity, but Miss Marple knew its peace was a fragile veneer, easily cracked by the weight of unspoken truths. The letter in the crypt had exposed a fraud, but its existence raised questions. Who else had known of the forgery, and why had they remained silent for so long? The final guardian had been Eliza's grandfather, William Harrow, but Miss Marple suspected others might have shared his burden or exploited it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. It was Mrs. Price, the postmistress. Her face flushed with the importance of her news. "Miss Marple, I had to come straight away," she said, stepping inside with a gust of cold air. "There's been a queer thing at the old forge. Someone's been seen there. Late at night, Mr. Bailey, the blacksmith's son, swears he saw a light moving inside, though the place has been locked up since old Mr. Bailey passed last year." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. "The forge? That's unusual. Did Mr. Bailey describe this person?" "Not clearly," Mrs. Price admitted, settling into a chair. "Said it was too dark, but he thought it was a man, tallish, moving quick. He didn't dare follow, not with all the trouble we've had lately. I thought you'd want to know, miss, seeing as you've a way with these things." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already weaving connections. The forge was an unlikely place for a midnight rendezvous, but its proximity to the mill and the Ashford estate made it significant. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," she said, her tone gentle. "I'll look into it. One can't be too careful." After Mrs. Price left, Miss Marple donned her warmest coat and a woolen scarf, her walking stick in hand. The forge was a short walk, tucked at the edge of the village, where the lane curved toward the mill. The building was a squat, stone structure, its windows boarded and its chimney cold. She circled it carefully, her torch casting a thin beam over the ground. The door was padlocked, but fresh scratches marred the lock, and a faint footprint, long and narrow, suggesting a man's shoe, was pressed into the muddy earth nearby. She knelt, noting a scrap of paper caught in a bramble, its edge torn, but bearing a few scrawled words. "Forge, midnight, last chance." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The note was a summons, urgent and clandestine. She tucked it into her handbag, her thoughts racing. The forge, like the mill and the crypt, was another piece of the village's history tied to the ash. Old Mr. Bailey had been their blacksmith, forging tools and gates for the manor. Could he have known something about the forgery, or hidden something in the forge? She resolved to return at midnight, but not alone. She would need Sir Henry's authority and Constable Harris's strength back at her cottage. She telephoned Sir Henry, who was still in St. Mary Mead, overseeing the estate's legal transfer. "Jane, you're at it again," he said, his voice tinged with amusement. "A light in the forge, that's a new one. What do you make of it?" "I'm not sure yet," she replied, sharing the note's contents, "but it feels connected to the Ashford affair. Someone is still searching, Henry, and I believe they're after something we've missed, perhaps a final proof of the forgery, or something else entirely." Sir Henry agreed to meet her at the forge at 11:30, with Harris in tow. Miss Marple spent the afternoon poring over her notebook, cross-referencing every clue: the gold, the map, the locket, the journal, the letter in the crypt, and now the forge. One name surfaced repeatedly in the villagers' gossip, though never directly tied to the conspiracy: Mrs. Langley's brother, George Whitfield, a retired solicitor who lived quietly in Mead. Ellen Carter had mentioned him in passing, noting his frequent visits to the Grange before Richard Langley's arrest. Could he be the tall, soft-spoken man Mr. Tuttle had seen years ago, or the figure at the forge? To test her theory, Miss Marple visited Mrs. Langley in Mead, armed with a basket of homemade scones as an excuse. Mrs. Langley, still shaken by her nephew's crimes, welcomed her into the drawing-room, her hands twisting a handkerchief. "Miss Marple, it's kind of you to call," she said, her voice trembling. "I've been so unsettled with all that's happened." "I can imagine," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. I was wondering about your brother, Mr. Whitfield. He must be a comfort to you in these trying times. Mrs. Langley's eyes flickered. George. Oh, he's been wonderful, though he's been away lately. Some business in London, he says. He's always been private, you know. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on a photograph on the mantel, a tall, lean man with a reserved smile. Standing beside Mrs. Langley, he looks like a thoughtful man, she said. Does he ever speak of the Ashford family? I understand. He handled some of their legal matters years ago. Mrs. Langley hesitated, then shook her head. Not really. He dealt with their estate briefly after old Lord Ashford died, but he never said much. Why do you ask? Just tying up loose ends, Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. She left the Grange, her suspicions deepening. George Whitfield's connection to the Ashfords, however brief, placed him in the right time and place to know of the forgery. His recent absence was telling, and the note at the forge suggested a desperate move. That evening, Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Harris gathered near the forge, concealed in the shadows of a hedgerow. The night was cold, the stars hidden by clouds. At midnight, a figure approached all, moving with a quiet grace that matched Mrs. Langley's description of her brother. He paused at the forge's door, fumbling with a key. Miss Marple's torch caught a glint of metal, a small, ornate key, similar to the one found in Marwood's warehouse. Before he could unlock the door, Sir Henry stepped forward, his revolver steady. Mr. Whitfield, I presume, he said, his voice calm but firm. We'd like a word. The man froze, his face illuminated, a sharp, angular face, with eyes that held a mix of surprise and calculation. You've got the wrong man, he said, his voice low. I'm just checking. The property. Miss Marple emerged, her eyes gentle but unyielding. I don't think so, Mr. Whitfield. That key in your hand, it's for something hidden in the forge, isn't it? Something tied to the Ashford forgery. Whitfield's jaw tightened, but he didn't bolt. Harris moved closer, ready to act. You're clever, Miss Marple, Whitfield said, his tone bitter. Too clever for a village spinster. I've had practice, she replied, her voice mild. Now, why don't you tell us what you're after? The truth will come out, one way or another. Whitfield sighed, his shoulders sagging. It's not what you think. I'm no thief. I was protecting the village, keeping a secret that could ruin us all. He unlocked the forger's door, leading them inside. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of rust and ash. Whitfield knelt by the hearth, prying up a loose stone to reveal a small, locked box. He used the key, opening it to reveal a single documenta confession, written by Lord Ashford's solicitor, Charles Vernon, admitting his role in forging the royal grant. It named Whitfield's father, a junior clerk, as a witness who had kept silent out of loyalty. My father told me on his deathbed, Whitfield said, his voice hollow. He said the truth would destroy St. Mary Mead. State employs half the village. I hid this to protect them, but when the gold was found, I knew someone else was looking. I had to move it. Miss Marple's eyes softened. You've carried a heavy burden, Mr. Whitfield, but hiding the truth only feeds the shadows. Who else knew? Whitfield hesitated, then named a man, Henry Drake, a former estate manager who had left St. Mary Mead years ago but returned recently, posing as a traveller. Drake had been the figure at the forge, seeking the confession to blackmail the Ashford heirs. Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to the tall man. Mr. Bailey had seen Drake. Not Whitfield had been the midnight prowler. Sir Henry sent Harris to track Drake. who was found at a boarding house in Mead, his bags packed with forged documents, and a ticket to London. Confronted with Whitfield's confession, Drake crumbled, admitting his plan to extort the ash. The document was handed to Scotland Yard, its contents kept quiet to protect the village. As Miss Marple sat by her fire that evening, her knitting resumed its steady rhythm. The village was safe, its secrets buried once more. But she knew St. Mary Mead's calm was fleeting, and she would be ready when the next echo of the past surfaced, waiting to be heard. Chapter 10. The Last Thread. The November frost had settled over St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a crystalline shimmer that sparkled under the weak morning sun. Miss Jane Marple sat at her dining table, a pot of tea steaming beside her, her knitting needles idle for once. The fire in the hearth cast a warm glow, but her thoughts were as sharp and cold as the air outside. The arrest of Henry Drake, the final conspirator in the Ashford forgery scheme, had brought a semblance of peace to the village. The confession hidden in the forge, revealing the falsified royal grant, was now locked away in Scotland Yard's vaults, its truth suppressed to protect St. Mary Mead's fragile economy. Yet, Miss Marple's instincts, honed by decades of unravelling human secrets, whispered that the story was not complete. A single phrase from George Whitfield's confession lingered in her mind. The shadow remains, watching from afar. It was vague, almost poetic, but to Miss Marple it hinted at a presence, an unseen figure who had orchestrated the chaos from a distance. Untouched by the arrests, she sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the notebook where she'd meticulously recorded every clue: the gold, the map, the locket, the journal, the crypt's letter, the forger's confession. Each had led to a revelation. Yet the phrase "the shadow remains" suggested a mastermind who had evaded capture, someone with the cunning to manipulate others while staying invisible. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the village itself, its quiet lanes and familiar faces. In St. Mary Mead, secrets were like the frost beautiful, delicate, but quick to vanish under scrutiny. She resolved to probe deeper, to find the shadow before it could cast its influence again. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Miss Weatherby, her sharp features pinched with indignation. "Miss Marple, I simply must tell you," she said, sweeping into the parlour. "There's been a stranger seen near the old well by the manor last night, bold as brass. Mrs. Price swears it was a woman this time, dressed in black, carrying something heavy. She thinks it's another thief, but I say it's nonsense. Police have caught everyone, haven't they?" Miss Marple's heart quickened. "A woman near the well. That's most interesting. Did Mrs. Price see what she was carrying?" "A bag," she said. Miss Weatherby replied, settling into a chair. "Looked heavy, like it was full of tools or some such. She was gone before Mrs. Price could get a proper look. Jane, do you think it's connected to that dreadful Ashford business?" "I suspect it may be," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her mind racing. The well was an ancient structure, rarely noticed, tucked behind the manor's overgrown orchard. Its sudden relevance was no coincidence. "Thank you, Miss Weatherby. I'll look into it." After Miss Weatherby left, Miss Marple donned her warmest coat and scarf, her walking stick tapping as she made her way to the manor grounds. The well was a moss-covered relic, its stone rim crumbling but its depths still shrouded in mystery. She examined the ground, noting fresh footprints small, with a pointed toe, suggesting a woman's boot. Nearby, a patch of earth was disturbed, as if someone had been digging. She knelt, her fingers brushing the soil, and found a small metal object, a brooch, its design intricate and old, bearing the Ashford crest. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary trinket. It was a clue left behind by someone careless or in a hurry. She tucked the brooch into her handbag and returned home, her thoughts turning to the village's history. The well had been mentioned in the Ashford Journal, a passing reference to a place of safekeeping used during the Civil War. Could it hide another secret, one the conspirators had missed? She decided to consult the vicarage records again, hoping to uncover any mention of the well or its significance. Mr. Clement welcomed her with his usual warmth, though his eyes held a trace of weariness. "Miss Marple, you're a regular fixture. Here," he said, offering tea. "More questions about the Ashfords, I presume?" "Yes," she replied, settling into a chair. "I'm curious about the old well behind the manor. Was it ever mentioned in connection with the Ashford family, perhaps as a hiding place?" Mr. Clement's brow furrowed as he retrieved a dusty ledger. "The well, let me see. There was a story years ago about the Ashfords using it to hide valuables during the war. I thought it was just folklore, but—" He flipped through the pages, pausing at an entry from the 1640s. Here it is. A note about the well's secret, entrusted to a trusted servant, Mary Cole. No details, but it suggests something was hidden there, meant to be retrieved only by the family. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Mary Cole was a new name, but the village was full of Cole's descendants of old families, scattered across St. Mary Mead and Mead. One of them might know the well's secret, or be the woman seen last night. She thanked Mr. Clement and made her way to Mrs. Price's shop, hoping to learn more about the stranger. Mrs. Price was behind the counter, her eyes bright with gossip. "Miss Marple, I knew you'd come," she said, leaning forward. That woman by the Welshie was tall, thin, with a scarf over her face. I couldn't see much, but she moved like she knew the place. Dropped something, I think, before she ran off. Miss Marple showed her the brooch. Could this be it? Mrs. Price's eyes widened. "That's it. I saw it glint in the moonlight." "Where did you find it?" "Near the well," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. "Did you recognize anything else about her? Her walk, perhaps, or her manner?" Mrs. Price shook her head. "Too dark, but she was quick, like she didn't want to be seen. Reminded me of someone, though. Maybe Miss Cole, from Mead. She's a quiet one, keeps to herself." Miss Marple's heart quickened. Miss Cole, likely a descendant of Mary Cole. She thanked Mrs. Price and caught the bus to Mead, her thoughts racing. Miss Laura Cole lived in a small cottage near the village green, a spinster known for her love of gardening and her reticence. Miss Marple knocked, and after a moment, a tall, thin woman answered, her dark eyes wary beneath a neatly pinned scarf. "Miss Cole," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "I'm Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. I was hoping to speak with you about your family's history." Laura's face tightened, but she invited her in. The cottage was tidy, with a small desk covered in gardening notes and a single photograph of an older woman, resembling Laura, wearing a brooch identical to the one in Miss Marple's bag. "You're a Cole, by birth, I understand," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "Related to Mary Cole, perhaps, who served the Ashfords long ago." Laura's hands froze on her teapot. "You've been digging, haven't you?" "Yes, Mary was my great-great-grandmother. Why do you care?" Miss Marple chose her words carefully. "There's been some activity at the Ashford well. I found this there." She held up the brooch, watching Laura's eyes widen. "I believe it's yours. And I think you were looking for something hidden there. Laura's composure cracked, her hands trembling. You don't understand, Miss Marple. It's not about greed, it's about duty. Mary swore to protect a secret passed down through the family. I was checking the well to make sure it was safe. What secret? Miss Marple asked, her voice soft but insistent. Laura sighed, her shoulders sagging. A box hidden in the well. It holds a letter, a confession from the Ashford heir who forged the grant. Mary was tasked with hiding it to protect the family's honor. I've guarded it all my life, but when the gold was found, I feared someone else knew. Miss Marple's mind raced. Another confession, separate from the one in the forge. She persuaded Laura to show her the well, promising to keep the secret safe. That evening, they met Sir Henry and Constable Harris at the manor grounds, the well's dark mouth looming in the moonlight. Harris lowered a rope, retrieving a small, watertight box from the well's depths. Inside was a letter, its ink faded, but legible, confessing the forgery and naming a final conspirator, London banker, Sir Rowland Tate, who had financed the scheme and vanished after its exposure. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. Tate was the shadow Whitfield had mentioned, the unseen hand guiding the conspirators. She telephoned Sir Henry, who contacted Scotland Yard. Tate, now elderly and living quietly in London, was traced through banking records. Confronted with the letter, he confessed, admitting he had funded the forgery to secure a share of the Ashford wealth, using intermediaries like Marwood and Drake to keep his hands clean. As Tate was arrested, Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in her parlour, the fire glowing. You've unravelled it all, Jane, he said, shaking his head. The village owes you more than it knows. She smiled, her knitting needles clicking once more. It's the little things, Henry, the brooch, the footprint, the whisper. They always lead to the truth. Chapter 11. The Unseen Legacy. The December cold had wrapped St. Mary Mead in a crystalline embrace, frosting the village's rooftops and turning its lanes into glistening ribbons under the pale winter sun. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour, fire, a shawl draped over her shoulders, her knitting needles moving with their steady, comforting rhythm. The arrest of Sir Rowland Tate, the shadowy financier behind the Ashford forgery, had quelled the village's latest storm of gossip. The letter found in the well, confessing the forged royal grant and naming Tate as its architect, had been handed to Scotland Yard, ensuring the Ashford estate's legacy remained intact. Yet Miss Marple's mind was restless, her instincts whispering that the saga was not fully resolved. A single line in Tate's confession haunted her. The legacy endures, guarded by one who walks among us. It was cryptic, deliberately vague, and suggested a final secretor, guardian, still active in St. Mary Mead. Perhaps unaware of their role, or deliberately silent, she set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the window where the village lay. Quiet, its chimneys puffing soft clouds into the frigid air. The high street was nearly deserted, save for a few bundled figures hurrying to Mrs. Price's shop or the post office. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead was a haven of peace, but Miss Marple knew its calm concealed currents of secrets, flowing just beneath the surface. The legacy Tate mentioned could be another document, a hidden artifact, or even a person tied to the Ashfords' past. She resolved to probe deeper, to uncover this last guardian before their secret could spark another. Crissa. Knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Dolly Bantry, her cheeks rosy from the cold, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jane, you'll never guess," she exclaimed, stepping inside with a gust of icy air. There's been a sighting near the old oak by the manor. Mrs. Price saw someone there last night, digging, of all things. She thinks it's another thief, but I told her to come to you. It's too much like the Ashford business, don't you think?" Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. Digging by the oak. That's curious. Did Mrs. Price describe this person? Not well, Dolly admitted, unwinding her scarf. It was dark, but she said they were smallish, maybe a woman or a young man. They had a spade and were working fast, like they knew what they were after. She shouted, and they ran off toward the woods. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The old oak, a gnarled giant on the manor grounds, was steeped in Ashford lore, rumoured to mark a boundary from their ancient estate. Its sudden relevance was no coincidence. "Thank you, Dolly," she said, her voice calm but her mind racing. "I think a visit to the oak is in order." She donned her warmest coat, a woolen hat, and sturdy boots, her walking stick tapping as she and Dolly made their way to the manor. The oak stood alone in a clearing, its branches bare against the grey sky, its trunk scarred by centuries of wind and time. Miss Marple examined the ground, noting a shallow hole near the roots, the soil freshly turned. A few clods of earth were scattered, and a faint footprint small, with a rounded toe, marked the frost. She knelt, her fingers brushing the soil, and found a small, silver locket. Its chain broken, but its surface engraved with the Ashford crest. Her pulse quickened. This was no casual trinket. It was a clue, dropped in haste. "This is significant," she murmured, tucking the locket into her handbag. Someone was searching for something specific, and they're not done yet. Dolly shivered, glancing at the darkening woods. "Jane, this is eerie. What could be buried here? More gold, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps a truth the Ashfords wanted hidden. The locket suggests a family connection, someone tied to their legacy." They returned to Miss Marple's cottage, where she spread the Ashford journal on her table, its pages worn but legible. The journal mentioned the oak only once, in a cryptic note about a marker of trust placed there by Lord Ashford's sister, Lady Eleanor Ashford, who died childless in the 1880s. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the villagers' families, searching for any link to Lady Eleanor. One name surfaced: Mrs. Sarah Finch, a widow who lived quietly near the church, known for her charity work and her deep knowledge of local history. Sarah's maiden name was Ashford, a distant cousin of the main line, and Miss Marple recalled her mentioning an old family heirloom, a locket, lost years ago. Her next stop was Mrs. Finch's cottage, a neat dwelling with a garden of winter roses. Miss Marple knocked, and Sarah answered, her kind face creased with surprise. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," she said, ushering her in. "What brings you here on such a cold day?" "A small matter," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "I found something near the manor, a locket with the Ashford crest. I believe it may be yours." She held up the locket, watching Sarah's eyes widen. "My goodness," Sarah whispered, her hand trembling as she took it. "This was my grandmother's, Lady Eleanor's gift to her. I thought it was gone forever." "Where did you find it?" "By the old oak," Miss Marple said, her tone light but probing. "Someone was digging there last night. I wondered if you might know why." Sarah's face paled, her fingers tightening on the locket. "Digging? I don't know. The oak was special to grandmother. She said it marked a promise, but she never explained. I haven't been there in years." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Sarah's hands, which betrayed a nervous tremor. "Your grandmother was close to Lady Eleanor, wasn't she?" Did she ever mention a duty, perhaps to protect something? Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. Nothing specific. Just stories, old family tales. You know how they are. Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. She left the cottage, but not before noting a small, locked diary on Sarah's desk, its leather cover embossed with the Ashford crest. Her suspicions deepened. Sarah was hiding something, and the oak was the key. That afternoon, she telephoned Sir Henry Clithering, who was back in St. Mary Mead, to finalize the estate's paperwork. "Jane, you're relentless," he said, chuckling. "A locket by the oak. What's your theory?" "I believe there's another secret hidden there," she replied, sharing the journal's note and Sarah's reaction. Sarah Finch may be the guardian Tate mentioned, protecting a truth tied to Lady Eleanor. "We need to search the oak, but carefully, someone else is watching." Sir Henry agreed, and they arranged to meet at the manor at dusk, with Constable Harris in tow. Miss Marple spent the day reviewing her notebook, cross-referencing every clue. The phrase "the legacy endures" suggested a living connection. Perhaps a descendant or a vow passed down through the Ashfords. Sarah's connection to Lady Eleanor placed her at the heart of the mystery, but Miss Marple wondered if another player was involved, someone who had prompted the digging at dusk. The manor grounds were shrouded in mist, the oak a looming silhouette. Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Harris approached quietly, their torches dimmed. The hole by the oak was deeper now, as if someone had returned. Harris knelt, digging carefully, and struck something solid, a small iron-bound box, its lock rusted, but intact. Before they could open it, a rustle came from the woods. A figure, small and cloaked, moving swiftly toward them. "Stop!" Sir Henry called, his revolver drawn. The figure froze, then turned, revealing Sarah Finch, her face pale but resolute, a spade in her hand. "Mrs. Finch," Sir Henry said, lowering his weapon. "What are you doing here?" Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Sarah dear, there's no need to run. We've found the box. Tell us what it holds, and why you've guarded it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her spade dropping to the ground. "It's not for me," she whispered. "It's for the village. Grandmother swore to protect Italetta, proving the Ashfords' claim was legitimate. The forgery was a lie spread by rivals to discredit them. If it came out, the estate would be contested, and St. Mary Mead would suffer." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A legitimate claim, contradicting the forged grant. She persuaded Sarah to open the box, revealing a single letter sealed with the Ashford crest. It was written by Lady Eleanor, detailing the family's true grant, signed by a royal official in 1650. A second note, in Sarah's grandmother's hand, explained her vow to hide it, fearing its exposure would spark legal battles. "Why dig now?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes soft but piercing. Sarah sighed, her voice breaking. "I heard rumours someone in London, a lawyer named Mr. Carver, was asking about the Ashfords. I thought he knew, and I had to move the letter before he found it." Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to James Carver, the antique dealer arrested months ago. His cousin, a solicitor in London, must be the Mr. Carver Sarah feared. She telephoned Sir Henry, who contacted Scotland Yard. Carver's cousin, Simon Carver, was traced to a law firm, where he admitted to investigating the Ashford estate, prompted by a client, a distant Ashford relative seeking to challenge the claim. Confronted with the letter, he withdrew, ensuring the estate's stability. As Carver's scheme collapsed, Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in her parlour, the fire glowing. "You've saved St. Mary Mead again, Jane," he said, shaking his head. "How do you do it?" She smiled, her knitting needles clicking. "I listen, Henry. The village speaks, if you know how to hear it." Back in her cottage, as the frost glittered outside, Miss Marple reflected on the Ashford legacy, St. Mary. Mead was quiet, its secrets safe for now. But she knew its threads would weave new mysteries, and she would be ready when they called. Chapter 12. The whisper in the wind. The winter's grip tightened on St. Mary Mead, cloaking the village in a mantle of frost that sparkled under the pale December sun. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, the soft crackle of logs blending with the steady click of her knitting needles. The village had settled into a quiet rhythm after the revelation of the Ashford estate's true claim, secured by the letter found beneath the old oak. Simon Carver's withdrawal from the legal challenge had preserved St. Mary Mead's fragile stability, and the gossip had dwindled to a murmur. Yet Miss Marple's sharp mind was restless, stirred by a faint, persistent unease. The letter from Lady Eleanor, confirming the Ashfords' legitimate grant, had closed one chapter, but a single phrase in Sarah Finch's confession lingered. "The whisper in the wind carries the last secret." It was poetic, almost mystical, but to Miss Marple it hinted at a truth still hidden, a final player in the intricate game that had unfolded over months. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the window where the village lay still, its cottages dusted with frost like sugar on a cake. The high street was nearly deserted, save for the milkman's cart rattling past and a few children bundled against the cold, their laughter muffled by scarves. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead was a postcard of rural peace, but Miss Marple knew. Its calm was a delicate illusion, woven from secrets and silences. The whisper in the wind suggested something intangibly rumour, a memory, or perhaps a person who had watched the Ashford saga unfold without stepping into the light. She resolved to listen closely, to catch the whisper before it faded. Knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, her face flushed from the cold and her eyes wide with excitement. "Jane, I'm sorry to barge in," she said, stepping inside with a gust of icy air. "But something odd's happened at the church. Someone left a package in the vestry wrapped in plain paper, no name, just a note saying, 'For the truth.' I thought of you at once." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "A package, may I see it?" Mrs. Clement nodded, producing a small, tightly wrapped bundle from her bag. The paper was plain, but the note, written in a flowing, almost feminine hand, "Read, for the truth, to be opened by one who sees." Miss Marple's fingers traced the words, her mind racing. The phrase echoed Sarah Finch's cryptic remark, suggesting the package was meant for her, or someone like her, attuned to the village's hidden currents. She carefully unwrapped it, revealing a small, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed, but intact. The cover bore no title, but a faint embossing of the Ashford crest marked its spine. "This is no ordinary book," Miss Marple murmured, opening it. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, a diary of sorts, penned by Lady Eleanor Ashford herself. The entries detailed her fears of betrayal within the family, particularly from a cousin, Margaret Ashford, who had coveted the estate and spread rumours of the forged grant to discredit her. One entry stood out. "Margaret knows the truth, but her heart is bitter. She guards a secret, hidden where the wind sings loudest." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Margaret Ashford's descendants might still live in the area, and the wind, could refer to a place in St. Mary Mead, known for its breezy exposure, perhaps the hill above the manor, where an old windmill stood, its sails long broken, but its name enduring. She thanked Mrs. Clement, promising to return the book after studying it, and resolved to visit the windmill, suspecting it held the key to the final secret. She donned her warmest coat and scarf, her walking stick tapping as she made her way to the hill. The windmill was a crumbling relic, its stone walls weathered and its wooden beams sagging. The wind howled through the gaps, a mournful sound that gave the place its name. Wind Whistle Hill. Miss Marple circled the structure, her torch casting a thin beam over the frost-covered ground. Near the base, she found signs of disturbance. Stones shifted aside, and a faint scrape mark, as if someone had pried open a hidden compartment. She knelt, her fingers probing the earth, and uncovered a small metal box. Its lock rusted but intact. Before she could open it, a rustle came from the shadows of figure, small and cloaked, moving swiftly toward the woods. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but she kept her composure, tucking the box into her bag and hurrying back to the village. She needed Sir Henry Clethering's help to open it safely and to track the figure she'd seen. At her cottage, she telephoned Sir Henry, who was still in St. Mary Mead, finalizing the Ashford estate's transfer. "Jane, you're indefatigable," he said, his voice warm with admiration. "A box at the windmill. I'll be there in an hour with Harris. But be careful, this feels like it's not over yet." While waiting, Miss Marple studied Lady Eleanor's diary, her eyes scanning the faded ink. Margaret Ashford had been a formidable woman, jealous of her cousin's inheritance, and determined to claim it. The diary hinted at a hidden documenta codicil to the Ashford will, proving Margaret's line had a legitimate claim to a portion of the estate, buried to prevent a family feud. The whisper in the wind was likely this codicil guarded. By Margaret's descendants, Sir Henry and Constable Harris arrived, their faces serious. Miss Marple showed them the box and the diary, explaining her theory. "I believe Margaret Ashford's descendants are still in St. Mary Mead," she said. "One of them may be protecting this codicil or seeking it to challenge the estate." They opened the box, revealing a single, sealed document, the codicil, signed by Lord Ashford in 1875, granting a share of the estate to Margaret's line. A note, in a more recent hand, was tucked beside it, for the rightful heir to be claimed when the time is right. The handwriting matched the note from the vestry, confirming Miss Marple's suspicions. Someone was still active, guarding or seeking the codicil. Her thoughts turned to the villagers' families. Margaret Ashford had married a local merchant, John Barlow, and their descendants included the Barlows of St. Mary Mead, a quiet family who ran the village bakery. The current matriarch, Mrs. Emily Barlow, was a reserved woman, known for her piety and her visits to the church. Miss Marple recalled seeing her near the windmill during a recent church fete, her eyes lingering on the old structure. She decided to visit the Barlow's bakery, armed with a pretext of ordering Christmas cakes. Emily Barlow greeted her warmly, her hands dusted with flour. "Miss Marple, what a treat," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I do for you?" "A few cakes for the season," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "And I was wondering about your family. History. I understand you're descended from the Barlows, who were tied to the Ashfords." Emily's smile faltered, her eyes darting to a photograph on the wall, a stern woman, resembling Margaret Ashford, wearing a brooch like the one found at the oak. "That's right," she said cautiously. "My great-grandmother was Margaret Ashford. Why do you ask?" Miss Marple held up the locket from the oak, watching Emily's face pale. "I found this near the windmill, and a box with a codicil. I believe you know about it, Emily. You were there last night, weren't you?" Emily's hands trembled, and she sank into a chair. "You see too much, Miss Marple." "Yes, I was there. My grandmother told me about the codicil, said it was our family's right. I didn't want to hurt anyone, just to claim what's ours." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "Why now, Emily? Why not years ago?" Emily sighed, her eyes filling with tears. "I heard about the gold. The forgery thought it was time to act before the estate was settled. I didn't trust the lawyers in London. I just wanted justice for my family." Miss Marple nodded, her heart heavy. "Justice is a heavy burden. Emily, the codicil could tear the village apart. Will you trust me to handle it?" Emily hesitated, then nodded, handing over a small key hidden in her apron. "It's for the box. Do what's right, Miss Marple." That evening, Miss Marple met Sir Henry and Harris at the manor, where they examined the codicil. It was legitimate, granting a modest share of the estate to Margaret's line, enough to secure the Barlows' future without disrupting St. Mary Mead. Sir Henry promised to oversee a fair settlement, keeping the codicil's details quiet too. Avoid scandal, as Emily was spared prosecution. Her confession deemed a family matter, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting resumed. The village was calm, its secrets tucked away once more. But she knew St. Mary Mead's whispers would return, and she would be ready to listen. Chapter 14. The unseen hand. The January frost clung stubbornly to St. Mary Mead, turning the village into a crystalline tableau where every breath hung visible in the air. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, her knitting needles moving. With their familiar, rhythmic cadence, the soft click blending with the crackle of burning logs. The village had settled into a tentative calm after the arrest of George Whitfield and his London accomplice, Edward Lyle, who had sought to unravel the Ashford estate's legitimate claim. The document found in the church crypt, proving the pact between the Ashford, Barlow, and Spencer families, was now safely locked away, its existence known only to Sir Henry Clithering and a few trusted officials. Yet Miss Marple's mind was far from at ease. A single phrase from Whitfield's confession lingered, sharp and insistent. "The hand that guides remains unseen." It was a cryptic warning, hinting at a figure or force still orchestrating events from the shadows. Untouched by the web of arrests that had ensnared so many dots, she set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the frosted window where the village lay quiet, its cottages glowing softly under the pale winter sun. The high street was nearly deserted, save for the postman trudging through the snow and a few children building a snowman on the green. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead was a picture of idyllic peace, but Miss Marple knew its serenity was a fragile veil, concealing currents of secrets that flowed just beneath the surface. The unseen hand suggested a mastermind, someone with the cunning to manipulate Whitfield, Lyle, and their predecessors while remaining invisible. She resolved to trace this final thread, to uncover the hand before it could pull another string. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Dolly Bantry, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her eyes bright with the thrill of fresh gossip. "Jane, you'll never believe it," she exclaimed, stamping snow from her boots as she stepped inside. "There's been a sighting near the old barn by the manor. Mrs. Price saw someone there last night, poking about in the snow. She thinks it's another thief, but I told her to come to you. It's too much like the Ashford business, don't you think? Miss Marple's eyebrows rose. The old barn, that's intriguing. Did Mrs. Price describe this person? Not clearly, Dolly admitted, unwinding her scarf and settling by the fire. It was dark, but she said they were tall, cloaked, and moved like they didn't want to be seen. They were digging near the barn's foundation, then vanished when she called out. She found this, though, caught on a nail. Dolly handed Miss Marple a small, torn scrap of fabric dark wool, finely woven, with a faint scent of lavender. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The barn, a dilapidated structure on the manor grounds, was rarely visited, its connection to the Ashfords tenuous at best. Yet its sudden relevance was no coincidence. "Thank you, Dolly," she said, her voice calm but her mind racing. "I think a visit to the barn is in order." She donned her warmest coat, a woolen hat, and sturdy boots, her walking stick tapping as she and Dolly made their way to the manor grounds. The barn stood forlorn in a snowy field, its timbers sagging and its roof patched with ice. Miss Marple circled it carefully, her torch casting a thin beam over the snow. Near the foundation, she found a shallow trench, the snow disturbed as if someone had been searching. A faint footprint, long and narrow, suggesting a man's boot, was pressed into the frost. And nearby, a small silver ring glinted in the snow, its surface etched with the Ashford crest. Her pulse quickened. This was no casual trinket. It was a clue left behind by someone in haste. "This is significant," she murmured, tucking the ring into her handbag. "Someone is still searching, and they're tied to the Ashfords." Dolly shivered, glancing at the darkening sky. "Jane, this is unsettling. What could be hidden here?" "Another document." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "Or perhaps a truth the Ashfords feared would surface. The ring suggests a family connections, someone who knows the estate's secrets." They returned to Miss Marple's cottage, where she spread the Ashford journal on her table, its pages worn but legible. The journal mentioned the barn only once, in a note about a place of refuge used during the estate's troubled times. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the villagers' families, searching for any link to the Ashfords. One name, Sir Thomas Reed, a retired schoolmaster who lived quietly near the vicarage, known for his love of local history. Reed's mother had been an Ashford cousin, and Miss Marple recalled his mentioning an old family heirloom ring, lost years ago. Her next stop was Reed's cottage, a neat dwelling with a garden buried under snow. Miss Marple knocked, and Thomas answered, his kind face creased with surprise. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," he said, ushering her in. "What brings you here in this weather?" "A small matter," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "I found something near the manor, a ring, with the Ashford crest. I believe it may be yours." She held up the ring, watching Thomas's eyes widen. "My word," he whispered, his hand trembling as he took it. "This was my mother's past, down from her Ashford kin. I thought it was gone forever." "Where did you find it?" "By the old barn," Miss Marple said, her tone light but probing. "Someone was digging there last night. I wondered if you might know why." Thomas's face paled, his fingers tightening on the ring. "Digging, I don't know. The barn was a place my mother spoke of, said it held memories, but nothing specific. I haven't been there in years." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Thomas's hands, which betrayed a nervous tremor. "Your mother was close to the Ashfords, wasn't she? Did she ever mention a duty, perhaps to protect something?" Thomas hesitated, then shook his head. "Nothing clear, just stories, old family tales. You know how they are, Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. She left the cottage, but not before noting a small, locked box on Thomas's desk, its surface embossed with the Ashford crest. Her suspicions deepened. Thomas was hiding something, and the barn was the key. That afternoon, she telephoned Sir Henry Clethering, who was still in St. Mary Mead, overseeing the estate's final legalities. "Jane, you're tireless," he said, chuckling. "A ring. By the barn? What's your theory?" "I believe there's another secret hidden there," she replied, sharing the journal's note and Thomas's reaction. "Thomas Reed may be the guardian Whitfield hinted at, protecting a truth tied to the Ashfords. We need to search the barn, but carefully someone else is watching." Sir Henry agreed, and they arranged to meet at the manor at dusk, with Constable Harris in tow. Miss Marple spent the day reviewing her notebook, cross-referencing every clue. The phrase, "the hand that guides," suggested a mastermind, perhaps someone who had manipulated Whitfield and Lyle from afar. Thomas's connection to the Ashfords placed him at the heart of the mystery. But Miss Marple wondered if another player was involved, someone who had prompted the digging at dusk. The manor grounds were shrouded in snow, the barn a dark silhouette against the twilight. Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Harris approached quietly, their torches dimmed. The trench by the barn was deeper now, as if someone had returned. Harris knelt, digging carefully, and struck something solider, small iron-bound chest, its lock. Rusted, but intact. Before they could open it, a rustle came from the woods. A figure, tall and cloaked, moving swiftly toward them. "Stop," Sir Henry called, his revolver drawn. The figure froze, then turned, revealing Thomas Reed, his face pale but resolute, a spade in his hand. "Mr. Reed," Sir Henry said, lowering his weapon, "what are you doing here?" Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Thomas, dear, there's no need to run. We've found the chest. Tell us what it holds, and why you've guarded it." Thomas's eyes filled with tears, his spade dropping to the snow. "It's not for me," he whispered. "It's for the village. My mother swore to protect Eta Ledger, proving the Ashfords' debts were paid, clearing their name from slander. If it came out, the estate's rivals would lose their claim. But it would stir old wounds." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A ledger contradicting the rivals' lies. She persuaded Thomas to open the chest, revealing a leather-bound ledger, its pages detailing payments made by the Ashfords to settle debts falsely claimed by a rival family, the Grayson. A note, in Thomas's mother's hand, explained her. Vow to hide it, fearing its exposure would spark legal battles. "Why dig now?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes soft but piercing. Thomas sighed, his voice breaking. "I heard rumours a Grayson descendant, Mr. Philip Grayson, was asking about the Ashfords in London. I thought he knew, and I had to move the ledger before he found it." Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to the Graysons, a family long gone from St. Mary Mead, but still influential in London. She telephoned Sir Henry, who contacted Scotland Yard. Philip Grayson, a solicitor, was traced to a law firm where he admitted to investigating the Ashford estate, prompted by family law of unpaid debts. Confronted with the ledger, he withdrew, ensuring the estate's stability, as Grayson's scheme collapsed. Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in her parlour, the fire glowing. "You've saved St. Mary Mead again, Jane," he said, shaking his head. "How do you do it?" She smiled, her knitting needles clicking. "I listen, Henry. The village whispers, and the truth slips out." Back in her cottage, as the snow fell softly outside, Miss Marple reflected on the unseen hand. St. Mary Mead was quiet, its secret safe for now. Chapter 15. The last veil the January cold had settled deep into St. Mary Mead, wrapping the village in a brittle frost that turned every breath into a fleeting cloud. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour fire, her knitting needles moving with their familiar, almost hypnotic rhythm, the soft click blending with the crackle of burning logs. The village had exhaled a collective sigh of relief after the resolution of the Ashford ledger, which had cleared the family's name and thwarted Philip Grayson's attempt to challenge the estate. The ledger, proving the Ashfords' debts were paid, was now safely locked away, its existence known only to Sir Henry, Clethering, and a few trusted allies. Yet Miss Marple's sharp mind was restless, stirred by a persistent whisper of unease. A single phrase from Thomas Reed's confession lingered, sharp and elusive. The veil hides the last truth. It was cryptic, almost poetic, but to Miss Marple it hinted at a final secret. A truth so carefully concealed it had evaded even the most meticulous unravelling of the Ashford saga. She set her knitting aside, her eyes drifting to the frosted window where the village lay still, its cottages glowing faintly under the weak winter sun. The high street was quiet, save for the crunch of boots on snow and the distant chime of the church bell marking the hour. To an outsider, St. Mary Mead was a haven of rural tranquillity, but Miss Marple knew its peace was a delicate illusion, woven from secrets and silences that pulsed beneath the surface. The veil Reed mentioned could be a metaphor, a hidden truth, a person, or even an object tied to the Ashfords' legacy. She resolved to probe deeper, to lift this last veil before it could spark another crisis. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. It was Mrs. Price, the postmistress, her face flushed from the cold and her eyes wide with the thrill of fresh gossip. "Miss Marple, I had to come straight away," she said, stepping inside with a gust of icy air. "There's been a queer thing at the old Dovecote. By the manor someone's been seen there, late at night, poking about in the snow. Mr. Bailey's lad saw it, swears it was a woman, though he couldn't see her face. He thinks it's connected to that Ashford trouble, but I thought you'd know best." Miss Marple's heart quickened. The Dovecote. That's most intriguing. Did young Bailey describe this woman at all? "Not much," Mrs. Price admitted, settling by the fire to warm her hands. "Said she was small, wore a dark cloak, and moved quick, like she knew the place. She was digging near the Dovecote's base, then scarpered when he shouted. He found this, though, caught on a thorn." She handed Miss Marple a small, torn scrap of silk deep blue with a faint embroidery. Of a dove, Miss Marple's fingers traced the fabric, her mind racing. The Dovecote, a crumbling stone structure on the manor grounds, was an unlikely place for a midnight search, but its connection to the Ashfords made it significant. "Thank you, Mrs. Price," she said, her voice calm but her eyes alert. "I'll look into it. One can never be too careful." After Mrs. Price left, Miss Marple donned her warmest coat, a woolen scarf and sturdy boots, her walking stick tapping as she made her way to the manor grounds. The Dovecote stood alone in a snowy clearing, its conical roof sagging and its walls overgrown with ivy. She circled it carefully, her torch casting a thin beam over the frost-covered ground. Near the base, she found a shallow trench, the snow disturbed as if someone had been digging. A faint footprint small, with a pointed toe, suggesting a woman's boot was pressed into the snow, and nearby a tiny silver clasp glinted, its design a delicate dove matching the silk's embroidery. Her pulse quickened. This was no casual trinket. It was a clue left behind by someone in haste. "This is significant," she murmured, tucking the clasp into her handbag. Someone is still searching, and they're tied to the ash bits. She returned to her cottage, where she spread the Ashford journal on her table, its pages worn but legible. The journal mentioned the dovecote only once, in a note about a place of quiet trust used by Lady Eleanor Ashford to hide personal keepsakes. During her lifetime, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the villagers' families, searching for any link to Lady Eleanor. One name surfaced: Miss Ellen Hayes, a retired seamstress who lived quietly near the vicarage, known for her intricate embroidery and her deep knowledge of Ashford history. Ellen's grandmother had been Lady Eleanor's personal maid, and Miss Marple recalled her mentioning a family heirloom silk scarf, lost years ago. Her next stop was Ellen's cottage, a tidy dwelling with a garden buried under snow. Miss Marple knocked, and Ellen answered, her kind face creased with surprise. "Miss Marple, what a pleasure," she said, ushering her in. "What brings you here in this cold?" "A small matter," Miss Marple said, her smile gentle. "Found something near the manor silk scrap, with a dove embroidered on it. I believe it may be yours." She held up the silken clasp, watching Ellen's eyes widen. "My goodness," Ellen whispered, her hand trembling as she took them. "This was my grandmother's, Lady Eleanor's gift to her. I thought it was gone forever. Where did you find it?" "By the dovecote," Miss Marple said, her tone light but probing. "Someone was digging there last night. I wondered if you might know why." Ellen's face paled, her fingers tightening on the clasp. "Digging, I don't know. The dovecote was special to grandmother. She said it held memories, but nothing specific. I haven't been there in years." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze lingering on Ellen's hands, which betrayed a nervous tremor. "Your grandmother was close to Lady Eleanor, wasn't she? Did she ever mention a duty, perhaps to protect something?" Ellen hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing clear, just stories, old family tales. You know how they are." Miss Marple smiled, undeterred. She left the cottage, but not before noting a small, locked diary on Ellen's desk, its cover embossed with a dove. Her suspicions deepened. Ellen was hiding something, and the dovecote was the key. That afternoon, she telephoned Sir Henry Clethering, who was still in St. Mary Mead, finalizing the estate's legalities. "Jane, you're a marvel," he said, chuckling. "A clasp by the dovecote. What's your theory?" "I believe there's another secret hidden there," she replied, sharing the journal's note and Ellen's reaction. "Ellen Hayes may be the guardian Reed hinted at, protecting a truth tied to Lady Eleanor. We need to search the dovecote, but carefully. Someone else is watching." Sir Henry agreed, and they arranged to meet at the manor at dusk, with Constable Harris in tow. Miss Marple spent the day reviewing her notebook, cross-referencing every clue. The phrase, "the veil hides the last truth," suggested a final revelation. Perhaps a document or artifact that could reshape the Ashford legacy. Ellen's connection to Lady Eleanor placed her at the heart of the mystery. But Miss Marple wondered if another player was involved, someone who had prompted the digging at dusk. The manor grounds were shrouded in snow, the dovecote a dark silhouette against the twilight. Miss Marple, Sir Henry, and Harris approached quietly, their torches dimmed. The trench by the dovecote was deeper now, as if someone had returned. Harris knelt, digging carefully, and struck something solider, small, iron-bound box, its lock rusted but intact. Before they could open it, a rustle came from the woods. A figure, small and cloaked, moving swiftly toward them. "Stop, sir," Henry called, his revolver drawn. The figure froze, then turned, revealing Ellen Hayes, her face pale but resolute, a spade in her hand. "Miss Hayes," Sir Henry said, lowering his weapon. "What are you doing here?" Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice gentle. "Ellen, dear, there's no need to run. We've found the box. Tell us what it holds, and why you've guarded it." Ellen's eyes filled with tears, her spade dropping to the snow. "It's not for me," she whispered. "It's for the village. Grandmother swore to protect it, a letter proving Lady Eleanor's secret child. If it came out, the estate would be contested, and St. Mary Mead would suffer." Miss Marple's heart quickened. A secret child, hidden from history. She persuaded Ellen to open the box, revealing a single letter sealed with the Ashford crest. It was written by Lady Eleanor, confessing to a child born out of wedlock, raised in secrecy by a trusted family, the Hayeses. A second note, in Ellen's grandmother's hand, explained her vow to hide it, fearing its exposure would spark scandal. "Why dig now?" Miss Marple asked, her eyes soft but piercing. Ellen sighed, her voice breaking. "I heard rumours a man in London, a Mr. Thornton, was asking about Lady Eleanor's line. I thought he knew, and I had to move the letter before he found it." Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to the village's connections. Thornton could be a descendant or another opportunist seeking to exploit the Ashford legacy. She telephoned. Sir Henry, who contacted Scotland Yard, Mr. James Thornton, a genealogist, was traced to a London firm, where he admitted to researching Lady Eleanor's descendants. Prompted by a clienter, distant Hayes, relative seeking to claim a share of the estate. Confronted with the letter, he withdrew, ensuring the estate's stability. As Thornton's scheme collapsed, Miss Marple sat with Sir Henry in her parlour, the fire glowing. "You've saved St. Mary Mead again, Jane," he said, shaking his head. "How do you do it?" She smiled, her knitting needles clicking. "I listen, Henry. The village speaks, and the truth slips out." Back in her cottage, as the snow fell softly outside, Miss Marple reflected on the last veil. St. Mary. Mead was quiet, its secrets safe for now, but she knew its whispers would return, and she would be ready when they called.